Asterisk, tonight we're diving into a story that is all too real for the person who lived it. We have a clip titled True Extremely Disturbing Cult Encounter, and it's one of those stories that will crawl under your skin and stay there. This isn't a campfire story. This is a raw, first-person account of someone who unknowingly walked into what they can only describe as a modern-day cult. The details are chilling, the atmosphere is tense, and the ending will leave you with more questions than answers. So, turn down the lights, get comfortable, and prepare yourself. You're about to witness a truly disturbing encounter. Let's roll the clip. My name is Daniel, and I was born in the fold. For the 22 years of my existence, I have never known another world, nor have I ever truly desired one. Our home, the Viridian Fold, is a lush, green valley cradled between colossal mountains that claw at the very fabric of the sky. Father Elian, our guide and protector, teaches us that these jagged peaks are the hands of God, our holy barrier shielding us from the moral decay and spiritual emptiness of the scorched world beyond. It is a world I have only glimpsed in the faded, dog-eared pages of the books lining the shelves of our communal library. The images are grotesque, alien things, automobiles that crawl like metallic beetles over veins of black asphalt, cities that swarm upwards like concrete anthills, soulless and gray, and the people, their faces are the most haunting, their eyes vacant, reflecting a profound and terrifying emptiness. Here, in the sanctuary of the fold, our lives are governed by a sacred simplicity. We are stewards of the land, coaxing our sustenance from the rich, dark earth. We weave our own clothes from the wool of our sheep, the flax of our fields, each thread a testament to our self-sufficiency. Our existence is a gentle, predictable rhythm, dictated not by the frantic ticking of a clock, but by the turning of the seasons and the unwavering word of Father Elian. Life is orderly, a meticulously choreographed dance of devotion and labor. The day begins with the resonant chime of the dawn bell, a sound that pulls us from our simple cots into the cool, misty air of the morning. We work in the sprawling fields or the humming workshops, our hands engaged in the honest toil that Father Elian says purifies the soul. Our meals are taken together in the great hall, a cavernous space of timber and stone, where the clatter of wooden spoons against bowls is a symphony of our unity. Before the sleep bell tolls, consigning us to the quiet of the night, we gather for the evening testimony. This is the cornerstone of our life. The moment we unburden our hearts and lay our souls bare before our brothers and sisters in the fold, there is no concept of money, no notion of private property. Everything, from the tools in the workshop to the very clothes on our backs, belongs to the community. Everything is shared. This, Father Elian explains with a serene and patient smile, is the foundation of our purity. It is how we remain untainted by the cardinal sin of selfishness, the spiritual plague that has ravaged the scorched world and turned its people into grasping, hollow shells. For all my life I have accepted this doctrine as absolute truth. It was the air I breathed, the water I drank, the only reality I had ever known. But in recent weeks, a question has taken root in the fertile soil of my mind. It is a small thing, a tiny, thorny seed of doubt, but its tendrils have begun to wrap themselves around my thoughts, squeezing until it is difficult to breathe. It began with the letters. All correspondence that enters or leaves the fold is first brought to Father Elian to be blessed. He reads every word he tells us, not out of suspicion, but out of love. It is a necessary quarantine, a way to ensure that no spiritual contagion, no whisper of the outside world's sickness can infect our sanctuary. I had never questioned this practice. It was simply another layer of God's protection. But then came the matter of my cousin Elara. She was born on the outside but was brought to the fold as a child. Last month she was waiting with a quiet, desperate anxiety for a letter from her grandmother, the only family she had left in the scorched world. She had confided in me that her grandmother was gravely ill, and the letter was to bring news, good or bad. She just needed to know. Days turned into a week, then 2. The letter never arrived. When Elara, her face pale with worry, finally found the courage to ask Father Elian about it, he greeted her with his signature expression, a placid, almost beatific smile, tinged with a deep, theatrical sadness. He told her, his voice a gentle caress of pity, that the letter must have been lost. The systems of the scorched world, he reminded her, were inefficient and broken, much like the souls of the people who inhabited it. He placed a hand on her shoulder and told her to pray for her grandmother's soul and for her own peace of mind. Elara accepted his words with a bowed head, but I could see the hope drain from her eyes, leaving behind a familiar emptiness. I felt a pang of anger on her behalf, a feeling so foreign it was startling. Later that same afternoon, as I was returning from the woods with a load of firewood, I took a path that led me behind Father Elian's private cottage, and I saw him. He was standing before a small, crackling fire, feeding it from a small stack of envelopes. The late afternoon sun caught the edges of the paper as they curled into black ash, and for a fleeting moment I saw the delicate, spidery handwriting on a pale blue envelope, just like the ones Elara's grandmother always used. He wore the same serene smile as he poked the embers with a stick, his face illuminated by the destructive flames. The question that had been a seed instantly sprouted, its thorny branches tearing through the placid garden of my faith. Why would he lie? The question became a physical presence, a stone lodged in my throat, a constant weight in my stomach. During the evening testimony, as I listened to my brothers and sisters confess to minor transgressions, a moment of envy, a flash of pride, a lazy thought during prayer, my own secret felt monstrous, a grotesque betrayal of the fold's most sacred principle, transparent souls. To keep a secret was to build a wall around your heart, to invite darkness in. For a full week I held the question inside me, and I could feel its poison seeping into every part of my being. The food tasted of ash. The hymns sounded like funeral dirges. and the faces of my family looked like masks. Finally, last night, I could bear it no longer. During the heavy silence that followed the final prayer, I forced myself to my feet. My legs shook, and my own voice sounded distant and thin when it finally broke the stillness of the great hall. "Father Elian," I began, my voice trembling so violently I thought it might shatter. "I have an impure question." Every head turned towards me. The air grew thick, heavy. "Why must you read our letters?" I pushed the words out, the stone in my throat scraping raw. "Is it that you do not trust us to guard our own hearts?" Or I paused, the final, most heretical part of the question tumbling out. "Do you not trust God to protect us?" The silence that followed was not the peaceful, contemplative silence of prayer. It was absolute, a hard, cold vacuum that sucked the very air from the room. 200 pairs of eyes were fixed on me, and in them I saw not anger, but a unified, soul-deep horror. It was as if I had sprouted horns and a forked tongue, as if I had vomited a torrent of blasphemies onto the sacred floor of the hall. Father Elian did not look at me. He rose slowly, his gaze sweeping across the horrified faces of the community. His own face was a mask of profound and tragic sorrow. "Brothers and sisters," he said, his voice resonating with a carefully measured pain, as if my words had inflicted a physical wound upon him. "It appears a seed of the scorched world has found fertile ground in our midst. The serpent of doubt has entered our garden." You didn't need to say my name. The shaming began immediately, a well-rehearsed ritual prescribed in the Book of the Fold for the spiritually diseased. One by one, members of my community, people I had known and loved my entire life, stood to diagnose my infection. Sister Agnes, an old woman whose wrinkled hands had taught me how to churn butter, said she had seen a shadow of pride lurking in my eyes for weeks. Brother Caleb, with whom I worked side by side in the fields every day, confessed that he had heard me humming a tune that was not one of our hymns, a melody of discord. Then my own brother, Samuel, stood up. He would not meet my eyes. He stared at Father Elian as he spoke, his voice tight with a chilling, clinical pity. "My brother's question has soiled the purity of this hall," he declared. "It has caused me deep spiritual pain and has made me question the security of my own soul." They weren't yelling. Their voices were calm, detached, speaking with the grave concern of healers discussing a terminal illness. They were systematically devaluing me, dissecting my character, and casting me out from the group soul that was the fold. I was sentenced to a week of solitary contemplation in the silence hut, with only water and dry bread to sustain me. I am here now, in this cold stone cell. The hunger gnaws at my belly and the damp seeps into my bones, but that is not the worst part. The worst part is the fear. I look out the hut's single narrow window at the green valley, at the towering mountains, at the only home I have ever known. And for the first time I see it for what it is. It is a prison. My question wasn't answered. It was erased. And I understand now, with a clarity that is both liberating and terrifying, that the true purpose of the walls, the mountains, and the rules isn't to keep the scorched world out. It's to keep us in. Asterisk. The Silence Hut was less a building and more a stone sarcophagus. It was small, damp, and perpetually cold, designed not for contemplation, but for the systematic dismantling of the self. The first 2 days were a blur of gnawing hunger and a profound, ringing silence that was louder than any noise I had ever heard. The world shrank to the 4 gray walls, the rough-hewn cot, and a single slit-like window that offered a sliver of the world I had lost. Through it, I could see the vibrant green of the valley floor and the distant, impassive faces of the mountains. They no longer looked like God's protective hands. They looked like the bars of a cage. My only human contact was the silent figure who appeared twice a day to slide a tin cup of water and a slab of stale, hard bread through a slot at the bottom of the door. The figure was always hooded, their face obscured, their movements swift and silent. They were not a person. They were a function, a reminder of my isolation. The bread was barely enough to keep the worst of the hunger pangs at bay, and the water was always icy cold. The deprivation was a tool meant to weaken the body and with it the will. Father Elian often taught that a disciplined body led to a disciplined mind. I now understood that a starved body led to a broken one. By the 3rd day, the silence began to play tricks on me. I would hear things, the faint echo of a hymn, the distant chime of the work bell, the murmur of voices just beyond the door. I would press my ear against the cold, rough stone, straining to listen, only to be met with the frantic thumping of my own heart. The isolation was a mirror, forcing me to confront the terrified stranger who stared back from the depths of my own mind. My thoughts, once orderly and serene, were now a chaotic storm of fear, anger, and a desperate, clawing loneliness. I replayed the scene in the great hall endlessly, the looks of horror on the faces of my friends, the clinical pity in my own brother's voice. They had not been trying to heal me. They had been performing an exorcism, casting out the demon of individuality. It was on the 4th night that something changed. The moon was a sharp sliver in the sky, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor of my cell. I was lying on my cot, shivering, when I heard a faint scratching sound at the base of the door. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was not the sound of the food slot. This was quieter, more furtive. I slid off the cot, my bare feet silent on the stone floor, and crept towards the door. Daniel? The voice was a mere whisper, so faint I thought I had imagined it. It was a ghost in the suffocating silence. Daniel, are you there? It was Elare. My heart leaped with a feeling so fierce it was painful. I pressed my face against the rough wood of the door, my lips close to the crack at the bottom. Elara? What are you doing? You can't be here. If they find you... I know, she whispered back, her voice tight with fear. I had to wait until everyone was asleep. The night guard is old Brother Jonah. He sleeps more than he watches. I could hear the rustle of fabric as she shifted her position. Are you all right? They said. They said you were sick with the scourge's doubt. I'm hungry and I'm cold. I whispered, the words of relief to speak. But I am not sick. I just asked a question. There was a long pause. For a terrifying moment I thought she had gone, that I had scared her away with my defiance. But then she spoke again, her voice even, lower, laced with a new urgency. I think your question was the right one, Daniel. I think we are all sick, and we don't even know it. A piece of folded cloth was pushed through the narrow gap under the door. It was still warm. I fumbled for it in the dark, my fingers closing. Around it, there was a small loaf of fresh bread, soft and fragrant with herbs. Hidden inside it was a small wedge of cheese. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. I devoured it in the darkness, a simple act of eating a kindness so profound it brought tears to my eyes. Thank you, I breathed, my throat thick. With emotion, there's more, she said. After what happened in the hall, I went back to Father Elian's cottage. I know I shouldn't have, but I couldn't stop thinking about what you saw. About the fire. She hesitated. I found something, Daniel. In the ash pile. Most of it was gone, but a small piece had been blown to the side, caught in the roots of a bush. I could hear her fumbling with something. A small, stiff piece of paper was pushed under the door. My fingers trembled as I took it. Even in the faint moonlight, I could see the singed edges and the familiar, delicate handwriting. There were only a few words left legible, a fragment of a sentence that made the blood freeze in my veins. Get you out. The arrangement is made. Be ready on the rest was ash. It's for my grandmother, Elora whispered, her voice breaking. He didn't just burn the letter, Daniel. He was stopping her. He was stopping me. The cold in the hut was no longer just from the damp stone. It was a deep, internal chill of absolute horror. The lie was so much bigger, so much more sinister than I could have ever imagined. It wasn't just about maintaining purity or protecting us from outside ideas. It was about control, absolute, suffocating control. My cousin's grandmother hadn't just been writing to check on her. She had been trying to rescue her. What does it mean? I asked, my own voice a stranger's whisper. An arrangement? I don't know, she said, and I could hear the despair in her voice. But it means she knew. She knew this place wasn't what it seems. And Father Elian knew she knew. We stayed there for what felt like hours, whispering through the door. Elora told me that the atmosphere in the fold had changed since my public shaming. There was a new tension, a heightened sense of vigilance. People watched each other more closely, their smiles a little too bright, their piety a little too loud. My illness had become a cautionary tale, a tool to reinforce the walls of their faith. Anyone showing even a hint of nonconformity was met with gentle, concerned questions and invitations to share their burdens with the community. It was a soft, smiling form of terror, not my fear. which had been a shapeless, paralyzing dread, began to crystallize into something harder, sharper. Resolve. I was not going to be broken in this hut. I was not going to be erased. "Elara," I said, my voice steady for the first time in days, "we have to leave." The silence on the other side of the door was absolute. I had spoken the ultimate blasphemy, a thought more heretical than any question. "How?" she finally whispered. "The mountains, the gates are always guarded. No one has ever left the fold." "I don't know," I admitted, "but we have to find a way. We have to try. He's not just reading letters, Elara. He's burying people alive." Before she left, slipping away into the darkness like a phantom, she promised to come back if she could. She promised to be my eyes and ears. As I watched her shadow disappear, a new kind of fear settled over me, but it was different. It was the fear of a hunted animal, sharp and focused. The remaining days of my confinement passed in a haze of calculated thought. I ate the stale bread and drank the cold water, but now it was fuel. I paced the small cell, not in frantic circles, but in measured steps, testing my strength. I studied the sliver of valley through my window, memorizing the contours of the land, the patterns of the clouds, the positions of the watchtowers along the perimeter fence. When the door finally opened on the 7th morning, I was ready. Two grim-faced brothers I did not know stood there, their eyes cold and assessing. They led me out into the blinding sunlight. My legs were weak, but I forced myself to stand tall. They escorted me to the great hall where the entire community was gathered. As I walked through the door, a hush fell over the room. Father Elian stood on the dais, his arms open wide, his face a perfect portrait of loving forgiveness. "Welcome back to the light, my son," he said, his voice booming through the hall. "Have you contemplated your impurity? Are you ready to be cleansed?" I looked at his serene, smiling face, at the faces of my brothers and sisters, their expressions, a mixture of pity and hope. I thought of the ashes of Elara's letter, of the words, "Get you out." I bowed my head, forcing tears of repentance into my eyes. "Yes, Father," I said, my voice choked with manufactured emotion. "I have seen the darkness. In my heart, I am ready to be made pure again." My performance in the great hall was met with a wave of cathartic relief. The community, desperate to believe in the strength of our shared faith, welcomed their lost sheep back with open arms and tearful prayers. I was subjected to a ritual of cleansing the next day, where I had to kneel before the entire fold as Father Elian poured blessed water over my head, washing away the stain of doubt. I played my part with the conviction of a true believer, my voice ringing with gratitude and shame. I became a model of repentance. I was the first to the fields and the last to leave. My voice was the loudest during the hymns. During evening testimony, I confessed to fabricated moments of weakness and thanked Father Elian for showing me the light. Inside, I was a coiled spring of terror and resolve. Every smile I offered was a lie, every prayer a blasphemy. My life became a double existence. By day, I was Brother Daniel, the redeemed. By night, I was a prisoner plotting his escape. The hardest part was facing my own brother Samuel. He took my recovery as his personal victory, a testament to his own spiritual strength. He would often put his arm around my shoulder, his eyes shining with earnest love, and speak of the beauty of submission. "You see now, don't you, Daniel?" he would say. "To question is to suffer. To obey is to find peace." Looking into his clear, untroubled eyes, I felt a grief so profound it was like a physical ache. He was already gone, lost to a world I was now desperate to flee. Elara and I developed a system of communication that was both simple and terrifyingly risky. We never spoke directly. A misplaced stone on a fence post meant I have something. An extra log on the communal woodpile meant meet at the old root cellar after the sleep bell. The root cellar was a relic from the original settlers of the valley, long since abandoned. It was damp and smelled of earth and decay, a forgotten space on the edge of the woods. It became our sanctuary, our war room dot in the flickering light. Of a stolen candle stub we would whisper our plans. Elara, having spent more time near the administrative cottages, had gleaned that a supply truck from the scorched world came once every 3 months. It brought things we couldn't make ourselves: salt, certain medicines, and replacement parts for the generator. The next delivery was in 5 days. This was our chance. The truck arrived in the evening and left before dawn. For a few hours, the main gate, usually bolted and barred, would be manned by only 2 guards. Often distracted by the unloading process, that my time in the silence hut had not been entirely wasted. From my window I had studied the patrol patterns. I knew there was a blind spot behind the weaving workshop, a stretch of fence that was obscured by a thicket of overgrown rhododendron bushes. It was close to the main path, but offered precious seconds of cover. The plan was terrifyingly simple. We would slip out of our dormitories after the sleep bell, meet at the root cellar to gather what little we had, make our way to the blind spot, and wait. When the supply truck began to leave, creating a diversion, we would make a run for the shadows along the road and climb aboard as it slowed for the final gate check. The night of the escape arrived with a cold, biting wind that rattled the window frames. Every gust sounded like a scream. Lying in my cot, I listened to the steady breathing of the other men in the dormitory. Each breath a link in a chain I was about to break. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. When the time came, I slipped out of bed, my movements practiced and silent. Elara was already in the root cellar when I arrived, a small, frightened shadow in the darkness. She had managed to steal a loaf of bread, a skin of water, and a small knife from the kitchens. It wasn't much, but it felt like a king's ransom. We didn't speak. A look passed between us, a shared terror, a shared resolve. Moving through the fold at night was like navigating a ghost world, and familiar buildings looked alien and menacing in the moonlight. Every shadow seemed to hold a watchful figure. We reached the rhododendron bushes, our hearts in our throats, and huddled together in the cold, damp earth. The wait was agonizing. Every minute stretched into an eternity. I could hear the distant voices of the guards at the gate, the low rumble of the truck's engine. Then we heard it. The grinding of gears, the hiss of air brakes. The truck was preparing to leave. Now, I whispered Dot, we broke from cover, running low to the ground, our feet silent on the soft dirt path. The truck was a massive, dark shape, its taillights glowing like two malevolent red eyes. It was moving faster than we'd anticipated. We ran with a desperation I had never known, our lungs burning, our legs screaming in protest. The truck slowed as it approached the gate. This was our only chance. With a final, agonizing burst of speed, I reached the back of the truck and hauled myself up over the tailgate, tumbling onto the hard, cold metal floor. I turned and reached for Ilara, grabbing her hand and pulling her up just as the truck began to accelerate again. We lay there, gasping for breath in the darkness, hidden behind crates of full-grown produce, being sent for sale in the scorched world. The truck rumbled through the open gate. We had done it. The impossible, we had done it. A wild, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my chest. We were out. The truck picked up speed, the wind whistling through the gaps in the canvas cover. I crawled to the back and peered out. The lights of the fold were shrinking behind us, becoming a small, isolated cluster in a vast sea of darkness. Freedom. The word was so big, so holy, I could barely comprehend it. Suddenly, the truck's brakes screeched, throwing us forward. It swerved violently and came to a shuddering halt. Confused, I heard shouting from outside. Then the canvas flap at the back of the truck was ripped open, and the blinding beam of a powerful flashlight flooded our hiding place. Standing there, silhouetted against the light, was Father Elian. He was not angry. He was not surprised. He looked at us with the same serene, sorrowful smile he had worn in the great hall. On either side of him stood several of the strongest brothers from the fold, their faces grim and resolute. "Oh, my dear children," Father Elian said, his voice a soft, pitying caress that was more terrifying than any shout. "Did you truly believe these mountains were our only walls? The fold is not a place, Daniel. It is a state of being. You can never leave it because it is inside you." My blood ran cold. The escape, the plan, the whispered conversations he had known. He had known all along. The supply truck wasn't our opportunity. It was his trap. He had let us believe we could escape, let us taste the hope of freedom, only to snatch it away at the last possible moment. It was the ultimate lesson in futility. We were pulled from the truck and led back towards the fold. We didn't struggle. The strength had vanished from our limbs, replaced by a cold, hollow despair. As we walked back through the gates, I looked at Ilara. Her face was a pale, blank mask of utter defeat. They did not take us to the silence hut. They took us to the infirmary, a place of clean, white walls and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Father Elian explained, his voice gentle and reasonable, that our illness was more severe than he had realized. Simple contemplation was not enough. We required a deeper healing. The next morning, my own brother Samuel came to my room. He was not there to shame me. He was there to administer my medicine, a small cup of bitter herbal tea. He told me it would help quiet the noise of the scorched world in my head. He smiled as I drank it, a pure, loving smile that did not reach. His vacant eyes. I am writing this now in the moments of clarity that are becoming shorter and shorter. The tea makes the world soft and distant. My memories of the fire, of the escape, are beginning to feel like a dream I once had. Elara is in the room next to mine. Sometimes I hear her humming one of the fold's hymns, her voice placid and content. They are not erasing our questions. They are erasing the part of us that knows how to ask. The true prison was never the valley. It was our minds. And we are finally being set free. Asterisk. My name is Jessica. To understand what happened, you have to understand the person I was 3 years ago when I first arrived in the city. I was a ghost haunting the shell of a life I thought I wanted. I had moved with a suitcase full of carefully curated dreams, each one polished to a high shine. A career in graphic design, a loft apartment with exposed brick and afternoon sun, a circle of clever, artistic friends who would discuss literature and art over cheap wine. The reality was a cramped fifth-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that never slept. A constant hum of traffic, a poor substitute for a heartbeat. My job was a sterile cubicle at a marketing firm where I designed soulless banner ads. My creativity, slowly bleeding out under the fluorescent lights. The city, which had seemed like a glittering promise from a distance, was up close, a vast, crushing expanse of concrete and indifference. Loneliness was a physical presence, a cold weight that settled in my chest each morning and followed me home each night. I'd walk through crowded streets and feel invisible, a single, silent frame in a movie where everyone else was living in vibrant color. I tried. I went to gallery openings and stood awkwardly in corners, nursing a plastic cup of warm Chardonnay. I joined a book club where the members seemed more interested in dissecting each other's lives than the novels. Every attempt to connect felt like pressing on a bruise, a painful reminder of my own inadequacy. I was 24 years old and utterly, profoundly alone. My dreams had curdled into a quiet desperation, and my diet consisted of takeout and the bitter taste of disappointment. I first saw them in a coffee shop on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It wasn't my usual place. My routine was a shield, and that day, for some reason, I craved a different view of the same gray sky. This shop was warmer, the air thick with the scent of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. They were occupying a large wooden table in the center of the room, a vibrant island in a sea of solitary laptop gazers. There were maybe 6 or 7 of them, all around my age, and they radiated an energy that was magnetic. It wasn't just their laughter, though it was loud and genuine. It was the way they leaned into each other, the easy physical contact, a hand on a shoulder, a head tilted in rapt attention. They were a self-contained universe, glowing with a warmth and confidence I craved like a starved woman craves food. Took a small table near the window, pretending to be absorbed in a book, but my attention was a tether pulled taut in their direction. I watched them for the better part of an hour, cataloging the details of their belonging. They shared pastries, debated passionately about a film, and seemed to operate on a level of intimacy I couldn't fathom. They didn't check their phones. They were completely present with each other. At the center of this constellation was an I, man named Marcus. He wasn't the loudest nor the most conventionally handsome, but he was their undeniable center of gravity. The conversation flowed around him, and when he spoke, the others would quiet down, their focus sharpening. He had a way of listening that felt like a gift, his gaze intense and validating. He gestured with his hands as he spoke, carving his ideas into the air. I couldn't hear his words, but I could feel their effect. He was the conductor of their symphony. When one of them got up to leave, she caught my eye. She had a kind, open face and a cascade of dark curls. She smiled, a simple, uncomplicated gesture that sent a jolt of warmth through me. On my way out, feeling a reckless impulse, I stopped by their table. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I stammered, my face hot. "I just ... You all seem like you're having a great time." "It's nice to see." The kind-faced woman smiled again. "We always do. You should join us sometime." It was Marcus who spoke next, his voice calm and resonant. "There's no time like the present. Pull up a chair. I'm Marcus." The introduction was that simple, that disarming. I sat, my heart hammering against my ribs. They made a space for me, shifting their chairs and their bodies to welcome me into their circle. They asked me my name, what I did, where I was from. They didn't just ask, they listened. Marcus, in particular, had a way of looking at me that made me feel like I was the most interesting person he had ever met. He asked follow-up questions, his psychological insights so sharp they felt like a key turning in a lock I didn't know existed. He seemed to see past the nervous, awkward girl and glimpse the person I so desperately wanted to be. He explained their philosophy that day, not as a sermon, but as a simple, logical truth. He called their group the chain. Society forges us into weak, temporary links, Jessica, he said, his eyes holding mine. Think about it. The friendships that fade after college, the transactional relationships at work where your value is tied to your productivity. They're all conditional, all fragile. His words resonated with a painful accuracy. I thought of the college friends whose texts had dwindled to birthday wishes on Facebook. I thought of my boss, who didn't know a single personal thing about me. But the most damaging of all, he continued, his voice lowering slightly, is what we call the primary bondage, the family unit. We're told it's the foundation of our lives, but for most, it's the first cage we're put into. It's a web of obligation, guilt, and unspoken expectations. Their love isn't for you. It's for their idea of you. A flicker of protest rose in me, but he was already moving on, his logic seamless. The chain is different, he said, gesturing to the group around us, who were all nodding in agreement. This is a permanent, unbreakable bond, a chosen family forged in absolute radical trust and honesty. We don't hide from each other. We don't pretend. We build something real, something that lasts. They invited me to a communal dinner that Friday. I walked out of the coffee shop feeling dazed, as if I had stepped out of the gray rain and into a world of impossible color. That invitation felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. For the first time in 3 years, I felt a flicker of something I had almost forgotten. Hope. The first year was a whirlwind of belonging, a dizzying immersion into the life I had only dreamed of. The communal dinners were loud, joyful affairs. The shared apartments were a testament to their philosophy of radical sharing. I had never felt so seen, so accepted. I felt like I had finally, after a lifetime of searching, come home. Asterisk. That first year was the honeymoon, a blissful blur of acceptance. I shed the skin of my old, lonely life and was reborn into the warm embrace of the chain. I moved into one of their communal apartments, a sprawling, slightly ramshackle place, filled with mismatched furniture, thriving plants, and the constant, comforting hum of life. We shared everything: food, clothes, money, and most importantly, ourselves. But the true heart of our existence, the furnace where our bonds were forged, was the Link sessions. These sessions were the core of our life, held 3 times a week without fail. We would gather in the main living area, pushing the furniture back to create a wide open circle on the floor. The lights would be dimmed, the curtains drawn, creating a sacred womb-like space, insulated from the judgment of the outside world. In the beginning, I found them terrifying. The idea of laying bare my innermost thoughts, the petty jealousies, the secret fears, the uncharitable judgments felt like a violation, but it was also intoxicating. The release was dizzying, like lancing a wound that had been festering for years. Marcus taught us that secrets were cancer, a poison that sickened the individual and weakened the chain. Honesty, in its most radical and brutal form, was the only cure. Marcus was the master surgeon in these sessions. He would sit within the circle, his posture relaxed, but his attention absolute, and guide us through the labyrinth of our own minds. He had an almost supernatural ability to see the hidden machinery behind our words. "Let's unpack that, Sarah," he might say gently after a confession. "You say you were annoyed that David didn't wash his dishes. But what's beneath the annoyance? Is it about the dishes? Or is it about feeling unseen, feeling that your efforts aren't valued? Let's trace the pattern." And he would, with devastating precision, tracing the line from a dirty plate back to a childhood hurt, a deep-seated fear of being ignored. He dismantled our defenses with the careful hands of a bomb disposal expert, revealing the flawed, selfish, frightened wiring within us. We were being remade, he said, stripped down to our base components and rebuilt into stronger, more honest, more loving human beings. We clung to his insights, grateful for the painful, cleansing fire. To be seen so completely, flaws and all, and still be accepted, was the most powerful drug I had ever known. The pressure to sever ties with our old lives was gradual, a slow, steady tightening of the noose. It began with what Marcus termed the weak links. These were the casual friends, the old colleagues, the remnants of a life that was no longer ours. My friend from college, who would occasionally text me memes or ask to get coffee, became a subject of a link session. What is the foundation of this relationship, Jessica? Marcus asked, his tone one of genuine inquiry. The group chimed in. Is she interested in the real you, the one in this circle, or the memory of a girl from 5 years ago? It's a nostalgia-based connection, someone offered. It's not about growth. It's about staying stagnant. They showed me how these relationships were holding me back, how they were based on superficialities and social conventions that we had evolved beyond. It was easier to let the texts go unanswered, to politely decline the invitations until the silence became permanent. Each severed tie was celebrated by the group as a victory, another step toward true connection within the chain. Then Marcus turned his focus to the primary bondage, our families. This was the master stroke of his philosophy, the final and most important cage to be unlocked. My parents, he explained with a sad, knowing look, didn't love the real me. They couldn't. They loved a version of me that they had created to fit their own needs and expectations. Their love was conditional, a form of control designed to keep me tethered to their world, their values, their toxicity. He called them suppressors, people whose ingrained, unconscious patterns would always seek to undermine and break the chain. I fought this. I loved my parents. They were good people who had sacrificed for me, who called every Sunday just to hear my voice. But my resistance was just another pattern to be dissected. Every phone call, every email had to be confessed and analyzed in the next linked session. I would recount a conversation, and Marcus and the others would reframe every word, twisting it until it became unrecognizable, sinister Doc, my mother's gentle. How are you, sweetie? Are you eating enough? Was not an expression of love. It was, Marcus explained, a manifestation of her own anxiety, an intrusive demand for information disguised as care. Notice the pattern, he'd say. She isn't asking who you are becoming. She is asking if you are conforming to her definition of okay. It's a control metric. My father's cheerful. We miss you, Jess. When are you coming to visit? Was not a simple expression of affection. It was a guilt-inducing manipulation. He is using the language of love to impose an obligation, a member named Liam pointed out. Someone who had already severed ties with his own family. He's making his happiness dependent on your actions. That isn't love, it's emotional blackmail. They were experts at this psychological alchemy, turning the gold of my family's love into the lead of toxic control. They were gaslighting me on a communal scale, My own feelings became untrustworthy, my own interpretations suspect. If I felt warmth during a call with my dad, it was only because I was still addicted to the validation pattern he had installed in me as a child. If I felt a pang of homesickness, it was the suppressor bond fighting back, trying to pull me back into the cage. The group became my only point of reference, my only mirror. Their collective interpretation of my life became more real than my own memories. If the chain, my loving, honest, chosen family, said my parents were toxic manipulators, then it had to be true. My own heart, it seemed, had been lying to me my entire life. Asterisk. The final break came 6 months ago. By then, the outside world had become a distant, gray memory. My life was contained entirely within the vibrant, high-stakes ecosystem of the chain. The constant analysis, the emotional intensity, the shared purpose, it was my entire reality. Marcus declared that I was ready for total liberation. The phrase itself was thrilling, a promise of a final, ecstatic release from a bondage I had been trained to despise. The group buzzed with a kind of holy excitement for me. This was my graduation, my ascension. To them, it was a beautiful, necessary ritual, and my successful completion would strengthen the entire chain. My own feelings were a toxic, churning swamp of fear and a desperate, conditioned need for their approval. I was terrified of causing my parents pain, but I was more terrified of failing my real family, of revealing a weakness in my own link that would disappoint Marcus. The ceremony was prepared with the solemnity of a sacred rite. We gathered in the circle, the air thick with anticipation. My phone was placed on a small wooden stool in the center, a sacrificial object on an altar. I was seated before it, the guest of honor, at my own execution. Marcus had spent hours with me in the preceding days, helping me craft the script. He didn't dictate it. He was too clever for that. Instead, he guided me, asking questions that led me to the correct conclusions, making me feel as though the cruel, clinical words were my own. How can you express your freedom from their conditional love, Jessica? What words will create the cleanest break, ensuring they understand this is not a negotiation? We polished each sentence until it was a perfect, gleaming weapon dot. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely dial the number. The call went to speakerphone, the tinny electronic ringing filling the silent room. Everyone was watching me, their faces a mixture of love, support, and intense expectation. My mother answered, her voice warm and familiar, a sound from another lifetime. "Jessie, what a surprise, honey. How are you?" The simple, loving question felt like a physical blow. I took a shaky breath and began to read from the script, clutched in my sweaty palm. "I am calling to formally sever the bond between us." Silence. Then my father's voice confused. "Jess, what is this? Is this some kind of joke? I have come to understand that my relationship with you is not based on love, but on control and obligation." I recited, my voice a monotone, a puppet's voice. "You are suppressors. Your ingrained toxicity has been a prison that has kept me from my true self. Suppressors? Jessica, what on earth are you talking about? My mother pleaded, her voice starting to crack. We love you. You're our daughter. They love you offer is conditional, I continued, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It is a form of bondage. I am choosing my real family now. I am choosing freedom. This is the last time we will speak. I could hear a choked sob, a sound that will haunt me until the day I die. It was my mother. My father started shouting my name, a raw, desperate sound. Before he could say more, I followed the final instruction. In the script, I pressed the red icon on the screen, severing the connection. The silence in the room lasted for a single suspended heartbeat. Then the chain erupted. They were on their feet, applauding, cheering. They swarmed me, pulling me into a massive group hug. You did it. You were so strong. You're finally free. They held me, rocked me, praised me for my courage. And in that moment, a horrifying schism occurred in my soul. One part of me was screaming, recoiling and self-loathing at the monstrous thing I had just done. But another part, the part that Marcus had so carefully built, was flooded with an overwhelming sense of relief. The pressure was gone. I had passed the test. I had made them proud. I had proven my link was strong. I let them hold me, and I cried, unsure if my tears were for the parents I had just lost or the family I had just secured. The true nature of that family was revealed last week. A newer member, a sweet, anxious boy named Kevin, was deemed ready for his own liberation. He was more fragile than I had been, his connection to his parents still raw and tender. He sat in the circle just as I had, his face pale and slick with sweat. He made the call, but when his mother answered, he broke. He dropped the script and just started sobbing. I can't, he whispered, shaking his head. I can't do it. Marcus's expression didn't change. Proceed with the script, Kevin. You are resisting your own freedom. No, Kevin suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with hysteria. No, you're wrong. She's my mom. You're all monsters. You're a liar, Marcus. You twist everything. He had broken the cardinal rule. He had challenged the integrity of the chain. The shift in the room was instantaneous and terrifying. The air of warm support vanished, replaced by an icy, predatory focus. Kevin was immediately surrounded. The link session transformed. It wasn't about healing him, it was about destroying him. Let's explore this pattern of rebellion, Kevin, Marcus said, his voice dangerously calm. The group, following his lead, descended like wolves. They used every secret he had ever shared, every vulnerability he had ever exposed, as a weapon. You call us monsters, but you told us you cheated on your girlfriend, Sarah said, her voice dripping with contempt. Is that what a good person does? You're afraid of being a man, just like your father, Liam sneered. You confessed it yourself. You're weak, and you're projecting that weakness onto Marcus. You crave chaos because you can't handle real intimacy. You're trying to break this because you're terrified of real love. They called it a pattern interrupt. It was psychological torture, a systematic vivisection of a human soul, performed live. They took his deepest fears and insecurities, the very things he had trusted them with, and turned them into cudgels to beat him into submission. He tried to fight back, but he was outnumbered and outmaneuvered. He collapsed onto the floor, curling into a fetal position, his cries devolving into incoherent, animalistic sobs. He's been confined to his room ever since, undergoing intensive re-linking sessions with Marcus. We are told he is healing from his hysterical episode. We are told he is being made strong again. I see him sometimes when he's allowed out for meals. His eyes, which were once so bright and nervous, are completely empty. He moves like a ghost, a hollowed-out shell. The boy who screamed is gone. I know I should be horrified. A part of me, a small, flickering ember of the girl I used to be, is screaming in silent terror. But the larger part of me, the part that Marcus built in the group, reinforces every single day, whispers a different story. It whispers that this was necessary, that Kevin's weakness was a sickness that had to be purged for the health of the chain. It whispers that this is what true, committed love looks like. An unbreakable, terrifying love. And the most horrifying part of all, I believe it, asterisk. My name is Benjamin Thorne, though that name feels like a relic from another man's life. It belongs to someone who believed in the predictable cadence of existence, a steady career, the quiet comfort of a shared home, the simple arithmetic of faith where devotion plus diligence equaled a life of substance. That man is gone now, washed away by a tide of uncertainties that left me gasping on a shore of utter desolation. I came to the oracle at eventide, seeking an anchor in a world that had become a merciless, churning sea. It began, as so many descents do, with a series of endings. The first was my job. For 15 years, I was a senior analyst at a respectable financial firm. I wasn't passionate, but I was proficient. I understood the language of numbers, the cold logic of the market. Then came the restructuring, a sterile corporate term for a guillotine. My proficiency meant nothing against the algorithm that deemed my position redundant. I was escorted out of the building with my life's work packed into a single cardboard box, the weight of it far heavier than its contents. 2 months later, my marriage followed. Sarah and I had been drifting for years, our conversations becoming barren stretches of silence, punctuated by logistical necessities. The job loss was not the cause, but the catalyst. It stripped away the last veneer of stability that held our fragile union together. "I can't do this anymore, Ben," she had said, her voice devoid of anger, which was somehow worse. It was the voice of a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. There was no negotiation, no fight left. Just the quiet, orderly division of two lives that had once been one. With my professional and personal worlds dismantled, my faith was the last pillar to crumble. I had been raised in the church, the hymns and scriptures of familiar comforting. backdrop to my life. But in the hollow echo of my empty house, the words felt like empty platitudes. Where was the divine plan in this wreckage? Where was the benevolent shepherd for this lost sheep? My prayers went unanswered, rising into a silent, indifferent void. I was adrift, a ghost haunting the ruins of my own life, convinced that the universe was not a grand design, but a chaotic, meaningless accident. It was during this period of aimless wandering, both through the city streets and the desolate corridors of the internet, that I found the teachings of the Oracle at eventide. It wasn't a flashy website or a well-funded organization. It was a whisper, a series of obscure forum posts and blog comments that spoke of a different kind of truth. They mentioned a voice, one that cut through the static of the modern world, offering clarity and purpose. The Oracle wasn't a person, they insisted, but a timeless consciousness, a wellspring of wisdom that spoke through a mortal vessel. Intrigued by a desperation I was too proud to admit, I followed the digital breadcrumbs to a small, unassuming townhouse in a forgotten part of the city. The address was never listed publicly, only shared through encrypted messages once you had proven yourself a sincere seeker. My first visit was filled with skepticism, a final, cynical grasp at something, anything, to believe in. The room was small and lit only by a constellation of candles that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood and old paper. About 20 other people were there, sitting on floor cushions, their faces a mixture of serene expectation and quiet reverence. They were people like me, I realized. People with the haunted look of those who had seen the bottom and were searching for a way to look up. Then she entered. Lyra. She was the vessel. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about her. She was of indeterminate middle age, with a kind, weary face and gentle hands that she clasped before her. She wore a simple gray dress and no adornments. She smiled softly at the assembled group, a gesture of pure, uncomplicated welcome. She claimed no special status, no credit for the wisdom that was to come. "I am merely the telephone," she would often say. "The voice on the other end is the one you have come to hear." She would sit in a plain wooden chair, close her eyes, and take a series of slow, deep breaths. The room would fall into a profound silence, the only sound the gentle flicker of the candle flames. After a few minutes, her posture would shift. It was subtle but definite. Her back would straighten, her head would tilt slightly, and when she spoke, the voice was not her own. It was a voice that was both ancient and ageless, masculine and feminine, a resonant timbre that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of your bones. This was the Oracle. The Oracle spoke of cosmic cycles, of ages of light and darkness, of hidden histories suppressed by mainstream institutions. It wove a breathtaking tapestry of ideas, pulling threads from Gnosticism, esoteric astrology, and the stranger fringes of quantum physics. It spoke of our world as being in the final corrupt days of the Kali Yuga, an age of discord and spiritual blindness. But it also spoke of hope, a coming great realignment that would sweep away the rot and elevate those who were prepared, those who were in tune with the true frequency of the cosmos. It was a dizzying, intoxicating philosophy. It didn't just explain my personal suffering, it contextualized it. My lost job, my failed marriage, my crisis of faith, they weren't random misfortunes. They were symptoms of a sick world, the necessary shedding of an old skin to prepare for a new reality. My despair was not a weakness, but a sign of my sensitivity, my inability to tolerate the poison of the modern age any longer. We, the followers, began to call ourselves the attuned. We were not lost. We were the ones who could finally hear the true signal through the deafening noise. Most importantly, the teachings were predictive. The oracle didn't just speak in grand, unverifiable abstractions. It issued prophecies, small at first, like stones dropped into a pond, to prove the water was real. It foretold a political scandal, naming a minor local official who would be embroiled in a corruption case. A week later, the story broke on the evening news, exactly as described. It predicted a sudden, sharp dip in the stock market, advising against a specific tech sector. I watched, stunned, as the market tumbled precisely on the predicted day, wiping out the very stocks I might have foolishly invested in had I still been in that world. It spoke of a rare migratory bird appearing in a local park, a species not seen in the region for 50 years. 2 days later, a local bird-watching group posted ecstatic photos online, confirming the sighting. Each fulfilled prophecy was a brick in a new foundation being built beneath my feet. My skepticism, once a shield, now felt like a foolish blindness. How could I deny this? It was empirical evidence. It was real. The relief was so profound it was almost painful. The universe wasn't chaotic. It was just operating on a level of order I hadn't been able to perceive. But now I could. I had the key. The oracle was my anchor, and Lyra, the humble vessel, was our guide. I surrendered to the current, believing with every fiber of my being that it was finally carrying me home. For the first year, my new life was a balm on my fractured soul. The community of the attuned was a family, bound not by blood, but by a shared sacred purpose. We were the quiet librarians of a forgotten knowledge, the tenders of a flame in a world succumbing to a cold, materialist darkness. The problem, the first crack in my new reality, appeared about a year ago, not with a thunderclap, but with a subtle, disorienting shift in the current. It began in the spring. The oracle, in a series of pronouncements that felt like the most profound wisdom I had ever heard, declared that the only path to surviving the great realignment was through absolute stillness. The world outside, he explained, was a maelstrom of chaotic energy, a storm of meaningless ambition and destructive desire. To engage with it was to be torn apart by it. Our salvation, our duty, was to become islands of tranquility. We were to withdraw, to turn inward, to cultivate a profound silence within our own hearts that would render us invisible to the coming cataclysm. The directive was absolute, and we embraced it with the fervor of true believers. It was a tangible, demanding path. We were to divest ourselves of all worldly attachments that created noise. This meant our jobs, our homes, our superfluous possessions. I sold my house, the last vestige of my former life with Sarah, and gave a significant portion of the proceeds to the Eventide community to secure our future. Others did the same. A talented musician sold his collection of rare guitars. A former chef let go of her bustling cafe. We severed ties with skeptical family and friends, not out of malice, but because their anxieties were a form of static that interfered with our attunement. We pooled our resources and moved into a large, dilapidated Victorian house that we consecrated as our sanctuary. Our days fell into a monastic rhythm, long periods of silent meditation, tending a communal garden, and the quiet study of the oracle's past transcripts. We spoke only when necessary in hushed tones, preserving the sanctity of the stillness. There was a deep, resonant peace in this life. I felt my anxieties, the ghosts of my past failures, finally begin to recede. We were a silent fortress, and I had never felt safer. Then came the fall, and with it the reversal. It happened on a Tuesday night. The candles flickered as they always did. The scent of sandalwood filled the air, and Lyra settled into her chair. The oracle's voice filled the room, but the message was jarringly different. It spoke of the necessity of dynamic action. The time for quiet preparation was over, it declared. The previous phase of stillness had not been the path itself, but merely a test of our devotion, a purification to ensure we were worthy of the true mission. Now we were to be soldiers of the light. We were to actively spread the message, recruit new followers, and acquire resources, financial and material, to build a new world from the ashes of the old. The great realignment was not something to hide from, but a wave we were meant to ride, directing its awesome power. I felt a cold knot of confusion tighten in my stomach. I looked around the room at the other attuned, expecting to see similar expressions of shock and bewilderment. We had just spent 6 months dismantling our lives in the name of stillness. I had sold my home for this, but I saw nothing of the sort. On their faces was only rapt attention, a seamless acceptance of this new decree. It was as if the past 6 months had never happened. After the trance, a quiet excitement buzzed through the room. People were already discussing strategies for recruitment, for fundraising. I found Marcus, the musician who had sold his instruments, his eyes now gleaming with a new kind of fire. "Marcus," I began, my voice feeling loud and clumsy in this shifting atmosphere, "I'm confused. What about absolute stillness?" The oracle was very clear. Marcus looked at me, his brow furrowing not with shared confusion, but with a kind of gentle pity. "Ben, the oracle has always taught that action is the final expression of faith. The stillness was to prepare us for this. You must have misunderstood the emphasis." "No," I insisted, my own memory feeling sharp and clear. "He said it was the path. He said to withdraw from the world entirely. We all did. We sold everything. Another member, a kind woman named Alara, overheard and placed a placating hand on my arm. "The oracle's wisdom is a river, not a stone," she said, echoing a phrase Lyra often used. "It flows where it must. Sometimes we hear what we need to hear at a certain stage of our journey. Perhaps you were too focused on the stillness and missed the larger current." She then gently suggested I might be experiencing static, a sign that my personal attunement was weakening, that the noise of my old life was creeping back in. Their words were meant to be comforting, but they felt like walls being built around me. It was classic gaslighting, a complete rewriting of history, but it was happening on a collective scale, with a placid certainty that was terrifying. I sought out Lyra the next day, hoping for clarity from the vessel herself. I found her in the garden tending to a bed of wilting roses. "Lyra," I said, trying to keep the tremor from my voice, "last night the oracle seemed to contradict everything he taught us in the spring. I remember the prophecies of stillness so clearly I appended my life for it. She did not stop her work, merely snipping a dead blossom from its stem before turning to me. Her smile was serene, beatific, and utterly impenetrable. 'Benjamin,' she said, her voice soft as velvet, 'the oracle's wisdom is not for the linear mind. It is a spiral. We may revisit old truths from a new height. The stillness you practiced gave you the strength for the action you must now take. The previous message was not wrong. It was simply incomplete. A test of your devotion to see if you could let go. You passed. Now comes the next test, to see if you can take hold.' Her explanation was a beautiful, intricate knot of logic that left me more tangled than before. It didn't answer my question. It invalidated it. It suggested the failure of understanding was mine alone. That night I bought a simple, black, hardcover journal and a pen. In the privacy of my small room, I began to write. I wrote down the prophecy of dynamic action, word for word, as I remembered it. Then I painstakingly reconstructed the earlier prophecies of absolute stillness from memory. My journal became my only anchor to reality, a silent, paper and ink witness that I was not going insane. A month ago, the stakes were raised. The oracle declared that the great realignment would begin on the night of the next lunar eclipse, less than a week away. He was incredibly specific. A vessel of light, a comet, would appear in the western sky at the peak of the eclipse. It would not be visible to ordinary people or their instruments, only to the attuned. It was the sign we had all been waiting for, the ultimate validation. The night of the eclipse, the energy in the trance room was electric. We didn't have a trance. We gathered on the roof of the townhouse, our faces turned to the darkening sky. We stood in silence as the earth's shadow crept across the face of the moon, a slow celestial curtain drawing back. The eclipse reached its totality, the moon a blood-red disk in the heavens. We stared at the western sky, our hearts pounding in our chests. We waited, and we waited. The sky was empty. There was no vessel of light. no comet. Just the cold, indifferent stars and the eerie crimson moon. The eclipse began to wane, and a palpable tension, a crushing weight of disappointment, settled over the group. The silence was no longer reverent. It was heavy and anxious. The next night, the mood in the trance room was funereal. The air was thick with unspoken doubt. Lyra began the trance, and we leaned in, desperate for an explanation. When her eyes opened, the oracle's voice filled the room, but it was not apologetic. It was triumphant. The oracle is pleased. Lyra announced, her own face beaming with ecstatic relief. The test was greater than you knew. The vessel of light appeared not in the physical sky, but within each of your hearts. The great realignment has begun internally. It was a test of faith, not of sight. Those who looked with their eyes were blind, but those who looked with their spirit saw the glorious truth. The room, which had been trembling on the verge of despair, exploded with joyous, tearful relief. People were hugging, laughing, celebrating a profoundly failed prophecy as the ultimate victory of their faith. The cognitive dissonance was a physical pain in my chest, a pressure behind my eyes. I looked down at my lap where my hands were, clenched. In my room, locked in a drawer, was my journal. On the last page I had written the oracle's words. A comet, a vessel of light, in the western sky. It was undeniable, objective proof. But as I looked up at the joyful, tear-streaked faces of my friends, my family, a more terrifying thought slithered into my mind. What if they were right? What if I was the one who was broken, my soul too literal, too mired in the material world, to see the metaphorical truth they all grasped so easily? Their shared reality was so powerful, so cohesive it was beginning to feel more real than my own memories, more real than the ink on the page. The days following the internal comet have been a slow, grinding torture. The atmosphere in the house has changed. The quiet peace of our stillness phase is gone, replaced by the frenetic, smiling energy of dynamic action. The attuned are now true evangelists, spending their days on the streets, handing out pamphlets filled with the oracle's beautiful, shifting wisdom. They return in the evenings with flushed faces, sharing stories of their encounters, of the seeds of light they have planted in the minds of strangers. Their joy is a suffocating blanket. It is constant, uniform, and absolute. Any flicker of doubt is now seen not as a valid intellectual question, but as a spiritual sickness, a dangerous static that could infect the group. My isolation is complete. I am an island of a different sort, now not one of tranquility, but of cold, gnawing dread. I perform the necessary rituals. I join the morning meditations, my mind a whirlwind of rebellion while my body sits in feigned peace. I go out with the recruitment groups, holding a stack of pamphlets, my smile a carefully constructed mask. I say the right words, nod at the right times, but I feel like a spy in a foreign land, a man mouthing the words to an anthem he does not believe in. The effort is exhausting. Every interaction is a performance, every conversation a minefield where one wrong word could expose me. My journal has become my obsession, my confessor. It is the only place where the truth, as I know it, still exists. I lock myself in my small room for hours, poring over the entries. The contradictions are laid bare in my own handwriting, a litany of broken promises and rewritten histories. The path is stillness, the path is action, the sign is a comet in the sky. The sign is a feeling in the heart. Reading it feels like staring into an abyss, but it's the only thing that confirms I am not the one who is lost. The book is my reality, but the longer I stay here, the more fragile that reality becomes. The group's reality is a force of nature. It is a hurricane of shared belief that erodes everything it touches. I see it happening to myself in terrifying flashes. Sometimes, during a meal, I'll listen to Marcus describe the inner light he saw on the night of the eclipse. His description so vivid and passionate that for a fleeting moment, I almost remember seeing it too. I have to physically shake my head to clear the fog, to remember the cold, empty sky. Their certainty is a virus, and I am fighting it with every ounce of my will. They are not lying, I've come to realize. That's the most terrifying part. They truly believe. Their memories have been overwritten, smoothed out to align with the Oracle's latest decree. They are living in a constant, fluid present, where the past is not a fixed point, but a story that is retold every night. A few nights ago, my carefully constructed facade almost shattered. During the evening trance, the Oracle, through Lyra, gave a new prophecy. It declared that to accelerate the great realignment, a great sacrifice was needed. It spoke of a cleansing fire that would purify the world, and that we, the attuned, must be willing to offer up that which is most precious. The language was vague, metaphorical, as it always was, but the tone was different. There was a hard, sharp edge to it that I had never heard before. After the trance, Elara, the woman who had once been so kind to me, approached me. Her eyes, usually soft and gentle, held a new, unnerving intensity. "Benjamin," she said, her voice low, "the Oracle feels your static. It is a blockage, a resistance. It weakens the group's attunement." "I'm doing my best," I stammered, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Your best is not enough," she replied, her voice losing its warmth. The Oracle spoke of a great sacrifice. Sometimes the most precious thing we must sacrifice is our own stubborn mind, our attachment to a false past. "You are clinging to shadows, Ben. You must let them go. For the good of the group." Her words were a clear threat, veiled in the language of spiritual concern. She was not trying to help me. She was trying to correct me, to erase the part of me that did not conform. I retreated to my room, my hands shaking so badly I could barely fit the key in the lock. I took out my journal. I had to read it to ground myself again, but as I opened it, a new, paralyzing fear gripped me. What if she was right? What if this journal, this book of facts, was the very thing holding me back? What if it was the source of my static, a monument to my own spiritual blindness? The group's reality was so powerful, so all-encompassing that it was starting to feel more real than the ink on the page. The thought was insidious. Maybe sanity wasn't about holding on to the facts, but about surrendering to the story. That brings me to now. It is just after midnight. The house is quiet. The other attuned are asleep, dreaming their serene, synchronized dreams. I am sitting at my small wooden desk, the journal open before me. The candlelight makes the ink shimmer. It is my proof. It is my sanity. It is my anchor. But the anchor feels impossibly heavy tonight. The pressure to let go, to join the warm, blissful certainty of the group is immense. It feels like standing on a high ledge, the wind whispering promises of flight. If I would only just step off. The oracle is the sole source of truth here, and the truth changes daily. To fight, it is to be in a constant state of war. To surrender is to find peace. I am holding my journal in my hands, its familiar weight a small comfort in the crushing silence. I am terrified that if I keep reading it, if I keep clinging to this objective, unyielding version of the past, the dissonance will finally break my mind. The strain of living a double life, of holding two contradictory realities in my head at once, is becoming unbearable. I will snap. And I am even more terrified that if I stop reading it, if I close this book and put it away for good, I already have. If I let go of this last anchor, I will not be broken. I will be absorbed. I will float away on the gentle, placid river of their shared delusion. My memories will be washed clean, and I will wake up tomorrow morning with a serene smile, ready to speak of the inner light I too saw in the sky. There will be no more conflict, no more pain, no more fear. There will only be the voice of the oracle, and I will finally truly be one of the attuned. The choice is simple. I can be sane and alone, or I can be mad and together. And in the suffocating silence of this house, I am no longer sure which is which. My name is Nora. I've always considered myself a rational person, someone who makes decisions based on evidence and logic, not on fleeting emotions or baseless fears. But rationality offers little comfort when you watch the world you know begin to fray at the seams. It started subtly, a low hum of anxiety in the background of daily life. News cycles became a relentless barrage of instability economic forecasts that spoke of collapse in hushed, serious tones, political divides that fractured nations, and a growing, palpable sense of global fragility. The world didn't just feel like it was teetering on the edge of a cliff. It felt like it was actively leaning over, peering into the abyss with a morbid curiosity. I saw it in the strained faces of people in the grocery store, in the nervous jokes colleagues made about the future, in the way every conversation seemed to eventually circle back to the same unspoken question. What happens when it all falls apart? That's when I found Gideon. I didn't find him through some whispered rumor or a cryptic flyer. I found him through a series of online lectures, meticulously researched and soberly presented. He was a former military strategist, a man with a mind like a steel trap, and a voice that could calm a storm. He spoke in absolutes, not of prophecy, but of probability. He called it the coming collapse, and he had the charts and data to back it up. With chilling calm, he would detail the inevitable, cascading failure of the power grid, the swift breakdown of supply chains, the logistical nightmare that would plunge modern civilization into a new dark age. He wasn't a wild-eyed prophet screaming about the end of days. He was a pragmatist, a logician. He argued that hope was a poor strategy and preparation was the only rational response, and providence was his solution. Tucked away in a remote mountainous region several states away, it was a self-sufficient compound he had been building for over a decade. It was more than a shelter. It was a meticulously planned ark. Solar arrays, geothermal wells, hydroponic farms, a state-of-the-art medical facility. It was a blueprint for survival. Gideon's lectures weren't just a warning. They were an invitation to stop being a spectator to the world's decay and become an architect of its rebirth. It was a place to not just survive the storm, but to outlast it and build what came next. 2 years ago, after months of deliberation, I made my choice. I liquidated my assets, cashed in my retirement fund, and invested my entire life savings into the Providence Project. Driving through the gates for the first time felt like taking my first breath of clean air after a lifetime in a smoke-filled room. The sense of relief was overwhelming. Here, the chaos of the outside world was a distant echo. Life became hard, disciplined, and meaningful. Our days were structured from dawn until dusk. We trained, we drilled, we prepared. Every resident had a function, a vital role in the machinery of our survival. I was assigned to the security detail, leveraging a brief stint in law enforcement from my early 20s. Others were assigned to medicine, agriculture, engineering, or education for the children. We were a well-oiled machine, a tightly knit community of over 200 souls, all focused on a single, unifying purpose: to be ready for the end of the world as we knew it. That sense of purpose was intoxicating. It was a powerful antidote to the helplessness I had felt for so long. We were not helpless sheep waiting for the slaughter. We were the shepherds of the future. The drills, at first, were entirely practical. They were extensions of our training, designed to test our skills under pressure. We'd run scenarios treating simulated injuries, with residents convincingly acting out symptoms of shock or trauma. We'd defend the perimeter against mock intruders played by our own security teams, testing our response times and communication. We practiced rationing, learning to subsist on minimal resources for days at a time. These exercises were challenging, but they built confidence and reinforced our sense of preparedness. They made sense. But over the last year, the nature of the drills has changed. They've become different, more psychological. Gideon calls them inoculations. He explains them in our weekly community meetings, his voice steady and reasonable. He says that the collapse will bring horrors that will test not just our bodies, but our minds. He wants to inoculate us against the sentiment, the pity, the hesitation, the weaknesses of the old world that will get us killed in the new one. He argues that compassion for our enemies is a luxury we won't be able to afford. We must be forged into something harder, something more resilient. And everyone nods in agreement, their faces grim but resolute. They trust him. We all did. The first one I found truly disturbing was the desperation drill. Gideon announced it one evening, explaining that we needed to be prepared for the flood of refugees who would inevitably find their way to our gates. They will be hungry, they will be sick, and they will be desperate, he said, his eyes sweeping over the assembled crowd. They will see what we have built as a prize to be taken, not a gift to be shared. Your empathy will be their weapon against you. For the drill, he selected a family, David and Maria, and their 7-year-old daughter, Lily. They were my friends. I'd had dinner in their small apartment just a week prior. Their task was to follow a script, to pretend to be starving refugees who had traveled for weeks, begging for food and shelter. Our task, as the security team on gate duty that day, was to turn them away, by force if necessary. I knew it was a drill. I repeated that to myself as I saw them approaching on the monitor, a small, pathetic procession kicking up dust on the dirt road. But the sight of them twisted something in my gut. Maria had dirt smeared on her face, her clothes were torn, and she was holding Lily, who was crying real, gut-wrenching sobs. Yet David, a man I respected for his gentle nature and quick laugh, had a look of raw, pleading desperation in his eyes that felt far too authentic. "Please," he begged, his voice hoarse as he gripped the steel bars of the gate. "We have a child. She's sick. We just need a little food, some water." I stood frozen, my hand hovering over the intercom button. I could hear Lily's cries echoing in the unnerving silence of the compound. Everyone was watching. From the guard towers, from the windows of the barracks, the entire community was observing the test. This was my test. "We can't," I said, my voice sounding foreign and brittle. "Our resources are for the community. You have to leave." "Please, I'm begging you," Maria cried, her voice breaking. "Look at her. Just a piece of bread for the love of God." Looking into her eyes, into the eyes of my friend, felt sickeningly real. The line between the drill and reality blurred into a nauseating gray. I hesitated. My training screamed at me to follow the protocol, but my humanity screamed louder. For a split second, I considered opening the gate. Then, Gideon's voice crackled over my radio, a shard of ice in my ear. "Sentiment is a bullet you point at your own head, Nora. The community is watching. Close the gate." His tone was not angry. It was cold, sharp, and absolute. It cut through my indecision like a surgeon's scalpel. My hand, as if moved by some external force, slammed the master switch. A heavy steel plate slid down over the bars, sealing the gate completely. The sound of it locking into place was deafening. On the other side, Maria's cries turned to screams of anguish. I did it. I turned away my friends. And as I turned back to face the compound, I saw the faces of my neighbors. There was no judgment, no pity. There was only quiet, grim approval. They had all passed the test, too, by watching me do the unthinkable and accepting it as necessary. That night I lay awake for hours, the sound of the steel gate slamming shut replaying in my mind. For the first time since arriving at Providence, I didn't feel safe. I felt like a component in a machine I was only just beginning to understand. The silence that followed the desperation drill was more unnerving than the drill itself. In the dining hall, conversations were muted, focused on practical matters. No one spoke of what we had done, of Maria's screams or Lily's terrified cries. It was as if we had all entered into a silent, collective pact to erase the memory. But it lingered. I saw it in the way Maria avoided my gaze for a week, the forced, brittle smiles she offered when we passed in the corridor. I saw it. In the new hardness in people's eyes, a flinty resolve that hadn't been there before. Gideon praised my actions, his hand resting on my shoulder in a gesture that felt less like a commendation and more like the branding of an animal. "You felt the weakness, Nora," he said in his low, resonant voice. "You felt it and you conquered. That is true strength." His words were meant to be a comfort, but they coiled in my stomach like a cold snake. I hadn't conquered anything. I had simply buried it, and I could feel it stirring in the dark. The drills escalated. A month later, Gideon announced a betrayal drill. The premise, he explained, was simple but vital. In the world to come, he lectured, his hands clasped behind his back as he paced before us, the greatest threat will not always come from the outside. It will fester within. It will wear the face of your friend, your neighbor. We must learn to identify it, to confront it, and to cut it out before the infection can spread. The logic was, as always, impeccable and terrifying. He had secretly instructed one of our members, a quiet, gentle man named Elias, who curated our small library, to betray the community by hoarding food. A security team, acting on an anonymous tip, discovered a cache of canned goods hidden beneath the floorboards of his room. Elias was dragged from his bed in the middle of the night and brought before the entire community, who'd been roused and assembled in the main hall. It wasn't a reprimand. It was a mock trial, a piece of horrifying theater. Elias stood on a raised platform, his face pale and confused in the harsh glare of the floodlights. Gideon acted as the prosecutor, but the witnesses were all of us. One by one, residents were encouraged to stand and testify against him. At first, people were hesitant, but Gideon prodded them, praised them for their vigilance and courage. Soon, a trickle of accusations became a flood. People didn't just speak of his crime. They were encouraged to detail his weaknesses, his perceived flaws. One person mentioned he was often late for his agricultural duties. Another pointed out he kept to himself, a sign of a secretive nature. It was a ritual of denunciation, a public vivisection of a man's character. Then Gideon's gaze fell on me. "Nora, as head of security, you understand the poison of betrayal better than anyone. Tell us what you see." Tell us why this weakness cannot be tolerated. Every eye in. The hall turned to me. Elias looked at me, his expression not of anger, but of bewildered pleading. I felt my throat tighten. To refuse would be to mark myself as a sympathizer, a weak link. So I stood, my heart hammering against my ribs. I spoke about the importance of trust, the fragility of our system, how one person's selfishness could doom us all. The words were hollow, rote, but they were enough. I had participated. I had thrown my stone. The verdict was exile. Elias was given a small pack with a day's worth of water and a single protein bar and was marched to the gate. He was forced to spend 3 days and 3 nights in the surrounding wilderness. We all watched him go, a lone figure disappearing, into the vast, unforgiving landscape. When he was allowed to return, he was a different man. He was gaunt, his eyes were haunted, and he moved with a shuffling, deferential gait. He never spoke of his experience, but he didn't have to. He had become a living testament to Gideon's lesson. The community could and would cast out its own. The enemy was within, and we were now all watching each other. The most recent drill was last week. It was called the cleansing. The name alone sent a shiver down my spine. Gideon announced that a highly contagious and fast-moving plague had broken out in one of the residential barracks. The 20 people who lived in that building were declared infected. Our drill was to enforce a total quarantine. If they tried to escape, our orders were to neutralize the threat. This time we were issued our standard rifles, but they were loaded with high-velocity paint rounds, the kind used in advanced military simulations. They hit hard enough to leave deep, painful welts and break the skin. The infected, however, were not told it was just paint. They were told to resist, to fight for their lives, to truly believe they were sick, and that we, their friends and neighbors, were going to leave them to die. Gideon wanted to simulate the sheer panic and animal desperation of a true pandemic. What followed was not a drill. It was a descent into chaos. The moment we sealed the barracks, the screaming started. People began smashing windows, trying to climb out. The infected team, led by a former firefighter named Marcus, organized a breakout. They burst from a side door, their faces masks of pure, simulated terror, and we opened fire. The compound, our sanctuary, became a battlefield. The sharp crack of the rifles echoed off the metal walls. The air filled with shouts and the sickening smack of paint rounds hitting flesh. People were screaming, crying, falling to the ground, clutching at their bodies. I saw a young woman I played cards with get hit in the face, the blue paint round exploding across her cheek like a grotesque wound. I saw Marcus charge our line, his eyes wild, and I raised my rifle and shot him 3 times in the chest. He went down, gasping, the dark blue splotches spreading across his shirt like blood dot. It felt real, too real. The lines of the simulation were not just blurred. They were erased, washed away in a tide of adrenaline and fear. We were no longer neighbors playing a game. We were hunters and prey, the healthy and the sick, the strong and the weak. We were acting out the very savagery Gideon claimed he was protecting us from. When it was over, the compound looked like the aftermath of a massacre. People were bruised, weeping, and trembling with shock. But Gideon gathered us together, his face glowing with a kind of grim pride. He called it a resounding success. "Today you felt the fire?" he bellowed. "You were tested, and you did not break. You have been cleansed of your hesitation. You are ready." The community, battered and shaken, clung to his words. They needed to believe it was necessary. They talked about the drill with a strange, feverish pride, showing off their welts and bruises as badges of honor, proof of their commitment. But I felt no pride. I felt only a profound and chilling horror. I looked at the faces of my friends, their eyes still wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, and I realized we were not just preparing for the monsters of the apocalypse. Gideon was forging us into them. He has a new drill plan for next week. He hasn't told us what it is, only that it will be the final inoculation, the one that burns away the last vestiges of our old world weakness and completes our transformation. I look at the hardened faces around me, the easy acceptance of cruelty, the trust they place in the man who is systematically stripping them of their humanity. And I am more afraid of the coming drill than I am of the end of the world. The week leading up to the final inoculation was a master class in psychological warfare. A heavy, expectant silence descended upon Providence, thicker and more oppressive than any winter fog. The usual camaraderie in the dining hall evaporated, replaced by furtive glances and conversations that died whenever someone approached. We were all watching each other, our minds poisoned by the betrayal drill, seeing potential weakness and treachery in every face. The bruises from the cleansing had faded, but the memory of the chaos lingered. I felt a constant, low-grade hum of adrenaline in my veins, the fight-or-flight instinct of a cornered animal. Sleep offered no escape, only fractured nightmares of paint-smeared faces and the hollow clang of the main gate slamming shut. I started carrying a knife strapped to my ankle, a small, cold piece of comfort in a world that had become utterly comfortless. I was no longer a resident. I was a prisoner, counting the seconds until my own execution. The night of the drill, we were summoned not to the training yard, but to the central amphitheater, a tiered space carved into the rock that Gideon used for his most important pronouncements. The air was cold, and our breath plumed in the harsh glare of the floodlights. Gideon stood at the center, flanked by his most loyal lieutenants, their faces impassive, carved from stone. He let the silence stretch, his gaze sweeping across our faces, making each of us feel singled out, measured, and judged. "Tonight," he began, his voice calm and hypnotic, "we complete our journey. For 2 years we have trained. We have purged our bodies of weakness and our minds of fear. We have been inoculated against desperation, betrayal, and panic. But one final contagion remains, the most dangerous of all. It is the root of all sentiment, the biological imperative that doomed the old world to failure. He paused, letting the words hang in the frigid air. I am speaking of the future, or rather our flawed, sentimental attachment to it. I am speaking of children. A collective gasp, sharp and involuntary, rippled through the crowd. My hand instinctively went to the hilt of the knife at my ankle. Beside me, I saw Maria's face drain of all color. Gideon raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. "Do not misunderstand," he said, his tone softening, becoming almost paternal. "Children are a biological reality, but in the world to come, they are a liability. They consume resources we cannot spare. They inspire a reckless sentimentality that clouds judgment. They are an anchor that will drag us all to the bottom. To truly be free, to truly be able to rebuild, we must be willing to make the hardest choices. We must be willing to prune the vine so that the tree may grow strong. The final inoculation is a test of that willingness. It is a test of sacrifice." He gestured to the side. Two of his guards emerged from the shadows, and between them was Lily, Maria's daughter. She was holding a small, warm teddy bear, her eyes wide with confusion and fear. Maria let out a choked sob and tried to run forward, but David, her husband, held her back, his face a mask of disbelief and terror. "This is not a punishment," Gideon said, his voice resonating with a chilling sincerity. "It is an honor. This child's sacrifice will be the foundation upon which our new world is built. Her memory will be a testament to our strength, our resolve. But the act must be performed by one of us, a symbol of our collective will." His eyes scanned the crowd again, and then they settled on me. My blood ran cold. "Nora," he said, "as head of security, you have shown you have the strength to conquer your weakness. You have led every drill. You will lead this one. You will complete our inoculation." One of the guards approached me, holding out a pistol. It wasn't a paint gun. I could see the glint of brass casings in the magazine. This was real. This was the final horrifying truth of Providence. We weren't preparing for the end of the world. We were a death cult, and this was our final bloody sacrament. I walked forward as if in a dream, my legs moving on their own. The faces of my friends and neighbors were a blur of conflicting emotions: terror, grim acceptance, and a terrifying, fervent belief. They were ready for this. He had made them ready. I took the pistol. Its weight felt obscene in my hand. I walked to the center of the amphitheater until I stood before Gideon and the small, trembling child. Lily looked up at me, her lower lip trembling. "Nora," she whispered, "I want my mommy." That single word, mommy, shattered the spell. It cut through the years of indoctrination, the fear, the logic, the relentless psychological conditioning. I looked from her terrified face to Gideon's serene, expectant one, and I saw him for what he was, not a savior, but a monster. And I saw what he had made us, his disciples. I raised the pistol, but I didn't point it at Lily. I pointed it at Gideon. The gasp from the crowd was a physical force. Gideon's calm expression finally broke, replaced by a flash of stunned disbelief. then rage. "Nora, do you know what you're doing? This is treason. This is the weakness I warned you about." "No," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "This is the last piece of my humanity, and you won't take it from me." Before he could react, I fired, not at him, but at the main floodlight above his head. It exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging the amphitheater into semi-darkness. Chaos erupted. In that instant of confusion, I grabbed Lily, shoving her behind me. "Run to your mother." I screamed. I fired 2 more shots at the other lights, and the panicked crowd began to surge, screaming and scrambling in the dark. I didn't wait to see what happened. I turned and ran, not towards the gate, but towards the one place I knew had a weak point. The old maintenance tunnel Elias had once shown me, hidden behind the agricultural domes. As I ran, I saw him, the librarian, standing near the edge of the chaos. He looked at me, his haunted eyes meeting mine for a split second, and he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod before melting back into the crowd. He wasn't going to help me, but he wasn't going to stop me either. I found the tunnel, pried open the rusted grate, and plunged into the darkness beneath the compound. I could hear the alarms blaring above me, the sound of shouts of orders being given. They would be hunting me now. I was the traitor, the disease to be cleansed. I ran through the suffocating darkness, my lungs burning, until I saw a faint sliver of moonlight ahead. I pushed open the exit grate and scrambled out into the cold night air, emerging into the wilderness a mile from the compound walls. I am still running. It has been 3 days. I look back sometimes, expecting to see the searchlights of Providence, but there is only the vast, silent darkness of the mountains. The world did not end. There was no collapse. There was only Gideon and his lies. He didn't save us from the monsters. He just built a cage and tried to breed his own. I don't know what lies ahead of me. I have no food, no water, only a pistol with 4 bullets left and the clothes on my back. I am alone, haunted by what I have done and what I have become. Gideon wanted to forge me into a survivor, to burn away my weakness. And as I stand here, shivering in the wilderness, a fugitive with the skills of a hunter, I am struck by one final, terrifying thought. Maybe he succeeded after all. Asterisk, my name is Owen, and that is the first and perhaps most fragile truth of my existence. It feels less like a name and more like a story that was told to me, a temporary label affixed to a vessel that does not truly belong to me, I was born into. The progenitors, a community founded and governed by the singular, overwhelming will of the man we call the patriarch. Here in our isolated enclave, carved from the heart of a merciless desert, we are taught that we are the last bastion of purity in a fallen world. The patriarch's teachings are the bedrock of our reality. It preaches that the outside world, the world of the ancients, has irredeemably corrupted the sacred bonds between man and woman. The family, as the ancients knew it, was a poisoned wellspring, contaminated by selfish desire, jealousy, and a profane possessiveness he calls flesh idolatry. Within the stark, whitewashed walls of our compound, under the relentless gaze of the sun, he has restored the divine order. This order is not a democracy, nor is it a council. It flows from a single source, a single authority, the patriarch. He is the designated father to every child, the spiritual husband to every woman. We, the sons, are his hands in the world, tasked with labor and obedience. The daughters are the sacred vessels, destined to bear the future generations of the progenitors. The concepts of a biological mother or a personal father are alien to us, spoken of only as historical sins. I never knew the woman who carried me, nor the man whose seed played a part in my conception. To even wonder about such things is to commit flesh idolatry, to chain oneself to the rotting corpse of the past. My mother was the woman assigned to raise me, but she was not the one who birthed me. The patriarch assigns children to mothers, based on what he calls spiritual resonance, a divine calculus to which only he is privy. Our lineage is not a river of blood, but a ray of light, and he is its son. We are all, in the most literal and absolute sense, children of the patriarch. This was the first truth I ever learned, the foundation upon which my entire world was built. My life until recently has been a seamless tapestry of service and devotion. My days are spent in the humid, glowing expanse of the hydroponic farms, where I tend to the vibrant green shoots that feed our community. The air there is thick with the scent of clean water and growing things, a stark contrast to the scorched, sterile sand that surrounds us. My evenings are for study, for poring over the patriarch's writings, his words a dense and intricate scripture that promises ultimate clarity. I have always believed in his wisdom. To see him is to understand the concept of power. He is not merely a man. He is a force of nature, his presence so immense it seems to consume the very air in a room, his certainty as absolute and unquestionable as the rising of the sun. To doubt him would be to doubt gravity itself. The horror did not arrive like a thunderclap. It began as a subtle erosion, a slow grinding down of the self so gradual that I barely registered the loss until gaping voids had been carved within me. It began with the reassignments, periodically. The patriarch will convene the community in the great hall for the evening convocation. We sit on smooth, backless benches, the air still and heavy with anticipation. He will stand before us, his shadow long in the lamplight, and announce that the divine order must be recalibrated. The currents of grace have shifted, he might say, his voice a low, resonant hum that vibrates in your bones. A new harmony must be established for the health of the whole. Then comes the decree. Sister Hannah, who for 5 years has been the wife of Brother Jonah, is now to be elevated to the patriarch's personal household. Her children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 4, will be given to the care of Sister Rachel. No one protests. No one weeps. A community exhales a collective, pious sigh of acceptance. The woman moves to her new quarters. The children are led by the hand to a new home, to a new mother, they must learn to love. To show sadness or attachment is the ultimate spiritual failure, a clear and damning sign of flesh idolatry. It is proof that you are still clinging to the world of self, unable to see the beautiful, intricate pattern of his divine will. I have had 3 mothers. The first, Sister Ilara, is a vague and warm memory, a scent of sun-baked herbs, and the soft hum of a lullaby I can no longer recall. I was 5 when she was reassigned to the kitchens. I remember the cold hand of a sister I did not know taking, mine leading me away from the only home I had ever known. I remember looking back and seeing Ilara's face, her expression as placid and serene as a still pool of water. She was demonstrating her piety. I learned then that love makes you weak, and showing it makes you a sinner. My second mother, Sister Miriam, was stern and devout. She taught me the patriarch's writings with a fierce intensity, her fingers rapping sharply on the page to mark a passage of particular importance. There was no warmth, only a shared devotion to the cause. When she was reassigned to oversee the infirmary after 3 years, I felt nothing but a quiet sense of correctness. I had learned my lesson well. Attachment was a weed to be pulled. My third mother was Sister Anya. She was different. With her, the silence was not empty, but full. She taught me how to properly graft the tomato vines, her hands moving with a gentle precision. We would work for hours in the hydroponics bay, the quiet hum of the machinery a backdrop to our silent companionship. She never praised me with words, but sometimes when I had successfully nurtured a struggling seedling back to health, I would see a flicker of something in her eyes, a warmth that defied the cold doctrines we lived by. It was a shared secret, a tiny, fragile flame of affection cupped against the wind of the patriarch's will. For 8 years, she was the quiet center of my world. The reassignment came on a Tuesday. The air in the convocation hall was thick with the smell of dust and incense. The patriarch spoke of sacrifice, of the need to give up that which we hold most dear to prove our faith. My heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I did not know why. It was an animal instinct, a premonition that my body understood before my mind could. Sister Anya, the patriarch's voice boomed, and the world seemed to shrink to the space between us. Your spiritual resonance has been called to a higher purpose. You will join the daughters in the weaving house. Your son, Owen, will be taken under the wing of Sister Yasmin. I watched her stand, I watched her turn. Her face was a perfect mask of pious acceptance, just like Sister Ilara's had been all those years ago. But as she turned to walk away, her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second. In that fleeting glance I saw it, not the serene acceptance of a saint, but the silent, shattering agony of a true mother losing her child. It was a look of such profound and helpless love that it broke through years of my conditioning. He had not just taken my mother. He had taken the only person who saw me as Owen, not just another son of the patriarch. That night, as I lay on my new cot in my new home, the sterile silence of Sister Yasmin's dwelling pressing in on me, I felt the first true crack form in the foundation of my world. The divine pattern he spoke of no longer felt like a beautiful tapestry. It felt like a wound. Asterisk, the wound that opened in me the night Anya was taken did not heal. It festered. My new life with Sister Yasmin was a study in cold piety. Her dwelling was immaculate, every surface scrubbed and bare, reflecting the harsh desert light with a blinding glare. There were no personal touches, no signs of a life lived, only the stark essentials of survival and devotion. Yasmin herself was a reflection of her home, severe, observant, and utterly devoted to the patriarch's order. She would watch me across the dinner table, her eyes small and dark, her questions like carefully aimed probes. The patriarch teaches that grief is the shadow of selfishness, Owen. Do you feel any shadows clinging to you? She would ask, her voice devoid of warmth. You must give your attachments to him. He is strong enough to carry them. I would give her the answers I knew she wanted, my voice a hollow echo of the devout boy I once was. But inside I was guarding the memory of Anya's last look, a secret, painful treasure that I refused to surrender. That it was in this state of quiet rebellion that I found Elspeth. Or perhaps we found each other. Love, as the patriarch defined it, was a choice, a transaction, and only he was permitted to be the broker. What grew between Elspeth and me was something else entirely, something he would call a sickness. It was a stubborn, beautiful weed forcing its way through the concrete of his perfect order. It began not with words, for words were a luxury we did not have, but with glances. I would see her across the great dining hall, her head bowed in prayer, and for a single stolen heartbeat, her eyes would lift and meet mine. In that silent space, a universe of understanding passed between us. We saw the same cracks in the world, the same weariness behind the pious masks. Elspeth worked in the kitchens, a place of steam and clattering metal. Sometimes our duties would overlap. I would deliver crates of vegetables, and for a few precious moments we would be in the same small space. We never spoke of anything but our tasks. The nutrient levels in these greens are optimal, I would say, my voice steady. The patriarch will be pleased, she would reply, her hands sorting through the leaves. But her fingers would brush against mine as I passed her a crate, a touch so fleeting it could be denied, yet so charged with meaning it left my skin tingling for hours. Once I found a small, smooth river stone, worn into the shape of a heart, tucked between two heads of lettuce. I kept it hidden in a loose panel behind my cot, a secret idol to a forbidden faith. We grew bolder. We found ways to be alone, if only for minutes at a time. There was a forgotten maintenance corridor behind the hydroponic farms, dusty and dark where the hum of the machinery masked any whispers. It was there we first truly spoke. I remember my first mother, she confessed one evening, her voice barely audible. They took her when I was 4. She used to sing to me. I can't remember the tune anymore, just that it made me feel safe. Her admission was a key turning a lock in my own heart. I told her about Anya, about the look in her eyes, the silent scream I had witnessed. In that corridor, surrounded by dust and darkness, we built a small, fragile world of our own, a sanctuary made of shared grief and forbidden affection. We foolishly believed our love was so pure, so selfless, that even the patriarch, in his divine wisdom, would have to recognize its sanctity. We planned to go before him to confess our sin and beg for his blessing, imagining a future that was never ours to claim. The patriarch's omniscience was a central tenet of our faith. He saw all, knew all. I had always believed it in a spiritual sense, but as my love for Elspeth grew, I began to feel the chillingly literal truth of it. His sermons in the convocation hall began to change. He spoke with increasing fervor about the dangers of secret loyalties and hidden affections. The community is a single body, he would thunder from the dais, his voice washing over us. And I am its heart. But what happens when a single cell decides it has a will of its own? What happens when it forms a secret bond with another cell, creating a private world that is not open to the whole? This, my children, is how sickness begins. This is how the rot of the ancients takes hold. It is a cancer of the soul. During these sermons, I felt his eyes on me. It was not a direct stare, but a sweeping gaze that seemed to linger on me for a moment too long, a searchlight pinning me in the darkness. The other sons would nod in fervent agreement, their faces alight with devotion. I would bow my head, my heart hammering against my ribs, feeling the heat of his words like a brand. He knew. He had to know. The paranoia was a constant companion, a cold knot in my stomach. Every interaction felt like a test. Every watchful glance from a fellow son, a potential report being filed back to the master. The end of our fragile world came, as all things did, with a reassignment. We were gathered in the great hall, the air stagnant and heavy. The patriarch began to speak of the need to prune the branches of the community tree, to cut away selfish desires so that the whole could grow strong and true, its trunk reaching toward the heavens. My blood ran cold. I risked a glance at Elspeth. She was sitting with the other kitchen daughters, her face pale, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She was looking at the floor, but I knew she could feel it too. The air was charged with a terrible purpose. Sister Elspeth, the patriarch said, and her name in his mouth was a violation. I watched, helpless, as she stood. Her body was trembling, a slight, almost imperceptible tremor that I could see from across the hall. Your spirit has been chosen for a singular honor, he continued, a benevolent smile playing on his lips. You are to be elevated. You will leave your duties in the kitchens and join the patriarch's personal household. You will become a vessel for the highest form of grace. He was making her one of his wives. The room was silent, but for me the world was a roaring inferno. I watched her walk toward the dais, her steps stiff and automatic, like a puppet being pulled by unseen strings. Her face was a blank, terrifying mask of submission. She did not look at me. She could not. To do so would have been to condemn us, both. The community began to murmur their pious approval, a soft chorus of "as it is willed" and "blessed be the patriarch." Each word was a shovel of dirt on the grave of the life I had dared to imagine. That night, after Elspeth was gone, the patriarch delivered a final, chilling sermon. He spoke of the beautiful, painful necessity of sacrifice. He spoke of how the things we love most are the very things that must be surrendered to prove our devotion. And as he spoke, he looked directly at me. There was no mistaking it this time. His eyes, dark and ancient, locked onto mine, and in their depths I saw no divine love, no benevolent wisdom. I saw only the cold, possessive satisfaction of a God who had identified a flaw in his creation and had just finished correcting it. He knew. He had known all along. And this was my punishment. Asterisk, the days following Elspeth's reassignment were a gray, featureless expanse. My punishment was not one of overt cruelty. There were no lashes, no public shaming. The patriarch was far more sophisticated than that. My punishment was to be left utterly alone with my loss, to exist in a world that had surgically removed my heart and then demanded I praise the skill of the surgeon. I performed my duties in the hydroponic farms with a mechanical, joyless precision. A vibrant green of the plants seemed to mock me, a symbol of life in a place where my own spirit was withering. I saw Elspeth, occasionally a distant figure moving silently through the patriarch's gardens, always surrounded by his other wives. She never looked my way. Her face, once a map of shared secrets and quiet defiance, was now as smooth and unreadable as polished stone. The vibrant, stubborn weed of our love had been expertly poisoned, and now only the memory of its bloom remained. A phantom ache in my chest dot my fellow sons, who had once been my brothers, now treated me with a cautious pity. They saw my silence not as grief, but as a spiritual malaise. Brother Caleb, his face earnest and creased with concern, would often find me during our work shifts. "You must open your heart to the patriarch's wisdom, Owen," he would urge, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder. "He prunes us because he loves. You see, he cuts away the diseased parts so that we may be whole in him. This sadness you carry, it is a sickness of the self. You must let him burn it out of you." I would nod, my face a careful blank, but his words were meaningless. The part of me he called diseased was the only part that still felt real. The rest was a hollow shell, a puppet performing the correct motions of devotion. The final erasure, the act that would complete my unmaking, came a week ago. The patriarch called a special convocation. A strange energy filled the great hall, a thrumming, electric anticipation that I had not felt before. He stood before us, his eyes burning with a messianic fire. He spoke of our journey, of our long path out of the corrupted darkness of the ancients' world. He praised our sacrifices, our devotion, our purity. "You have given up your profane connections to the past," he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "You have surrendered your selfish desires, your false families, your flesh idolatry. You have become a single, harmonious body, with one will, one heart. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over us. But there is one final remnant of the old world that clings to you. One last chain that binds you to the ghosts of your former selves, your names. A gasp rippled through the hall. Our names. They were the first thing we were given, the one piece of our identity we had been allowed to keep. The names you carry, he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, are echoes of a dead world. They are labels given to you by a society of selfish individuals. They are markers of the very self we have fought so hard to transcend. To achieve true, perfect unity in me, to become flawless instruments of my will, you must shed this final skin. He raised his hands, a gesture of benediction and command. Tonight you will be reborn. You will cast off the dead weight of your given names, and I will bestow upon you new designations. Names that do not speak of individuality, but of purpose. Names that bind you not to a forgotten past, but to your sacred function within the whole. A wave of ecstatic fervor swept through the room. The sons and daughters began to weep, to raise their hands, their faces contorted in expressions of rapturous surrender. They saw this not as a loss, but as the ultimate gift. I watched them, a cold dread coiling in my stomach. It was not just taking our names. It was taking the very story of who we were. One by one, he called us forward. Brother Caleb became guardian. 12. Sister Yasmin became instructor 4. Each person approached the dais, knelt, and renounced their old name. I cast off the ghost of Caleb, my former brother sobbed, his voice thick with emotion. I am nothing. I am only an instrument of your will. The patriarch would then place a hand on their head and give them their new designation. They would rise, their faces shining with a terrifying, ecstatic light, and rejoin the community. Reborn. My turn came. I walked forward, my legs feeling like lead. The faces of the community turned toward me, a sea of blissful, expectant eyes. I knelt before him, the stone floor cold against my knees. The scent of incense and his own cloying cologne was overpowering. Owen, he said, and my name in his mouth was a final, dismissive flick. You have been a troubled spirit. You have clung to the shadows. It is time to step into the light. Renounce the boy who was weak. Renounce the boy who loved selfishly. Renounce Owen. I looked up into his eyes. They were black, bottomless pits, and in them I saw the reflection of a terrified stranger. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. The name was a stone in my throat. Owen. It was my mother, Anya, her hand guiding mine. It was Elspeth, her fingers brushing against my own. It was a secret, beating heart of me. To speak it, to cast it away, felt like a final suicide. Speak it, my son, the patriarch urged, his voice soft yet laced with steel. The collective gaze of the community pressed down on me, a physical weight. I renounce ... Owen, I whispered, the words tasting like ash . A triumphant smile spread across his face. Good, the sickness is purged. From this day forward, you have a new purpose, a clean purpose. You are Cultivator 7. He placed his hand on my head. It was heavy, and a strange, cold energy seemed to flow from it, emptying me out. When I stood and turned back to the community, I saw them differently. They were no longer Caleb or Yasmin. They were a collection of numbers, of functions, and they looked at me with concern, not for a grieving boy, but for a faulty part. They whispered amongst themselves that Cultivator 7 seemed troubled, that he was still attached to the ghost of a boy named Owen, and that he needed their prayers to fully embrace his new, pure identity. I look in the mirror now and see a stranger with my face. The story of who I am is being systematically unwritten, erased line by line, and replaced with the patriarch's sterile, functional text. I am a designation, a number, a tool in his divine hand. He has taken my mother, my love, and now my name. The true horror is not that the patriarch is a monster who tortures and kills. The horror is that he is a God who uncreates. He is not destroying my body. He is dismantling my soul, piece by piece. And the most terrifying part of it all is that I am forgetting how to scream, because I am forgetting the name of the person who is being erased. Asterisk, my name is Alicia Hayes. For the last decade, my world has been one of elegant logic and binary certainties. As a systems architect, I find comfort in the clean, predictable flow of data, in the construction of digital worlds where every problem has a corresponding solution, every bug a patch waiting to be written. I believe in the power of information, not as a means of control, but as a tool for enlightenment. I believe that technology, when wielded with pure intention, holds the key to unlocking a better future for humanity. It was this deeply ingrained optimism, this faith in the systemic perfectibility of the human condition, that led me to the gates of the unity. The unity was not what the public imagined. There were no rustic communes in the misty woods of Oregon, no robed figures chanting in a desert compound. This was Silicon Valley, the gleaming heart of the new world, and the unity was its most ambitious venture. Its campus was a marvel of minimalist architecture and green technology, a sprawling complex of glass and brushed steel, nestled in the rolling hills south of San Francisco. It looked less like a spiritual movement and more like the global headquarters of a trillion-dollar corporation, which, in a way, it was. Its founder was a man named Cain. To the world, he was a visionary, a kind of tech guru who graced the covers of magazines, his TED Talks garnering tens of millions of views. He spoke with a quiet, magnetic intensity, his language a seamless blend of neuroscience, computer science, and secular philosophy. Cain's vision was as simple as it was audacious: to solve the fundamental problem of human suffering by transcending the limitations of the individual mind. He argued that loneliness, conflict, tribalism, and misunderstanding were not moral failings, but simple bandwidth problems. The human brain, he claimed, was an isolated processor, powerful yet inefficient, trapped in the skull's legacy hardware. The solution was to network them, to create a collective consciousness, a neural network of souls that he called the Unity. The mechanism for this was a proprietary software platform, a central AI he had christened the Chorus, and the biometric sensors every member wore. I wasn't a follower, I was a recruit. They sought me out for my expertise in neural network, architecture, and data security. The offer was irresistible, a chance to be on the core development team to build the very system that would, in Kane's words, upgrade humanity. The work was the most thrilling, most challenging of my career. We were architects of a new epoch, a world without secrets or loneliness, where every thought and feeling could be shared, understood, and harmonized by the chorus. We all wore the nodes. They were elegant silver bracelets, cool against the skin, that looked like high-end fitness trackers. But they were infinitely more complex. The nodes were our interface with the chorus, constantly monitoring our vital signs, our brainwave patterns, our galvanic skin response, our vocal tones, a ceaseless stream of biometric data that fed the central AI. In return, the chorus provided us with feedback. These weren't commands, but subtle nudges. A gentle, calming rhythm pulsed from the node if it detected a spike in anxiety. A personalized audio suggestion, whispered through a nearly invisible earpiece, might recommend a 5-minute meditation or a change in posture to improve focus. The goal was optimization, to synchronize each individual with the emotional and cognitive state of the group. In the beginning, it was nothing short of miraculous. I remember my first few weeks, the constant, low-level hum of social anxiety that had been my lifelong companion simply fading. If I felt a pang of self-doubt before a presentation, my node would pulse a steady, reassuring beat against my wrist, and the chorus would murmur in my ear, "Your contribution is valued. Your voice is clear." In group meetings, the system was an invisible moderator. A large screen would display a beautiful, shifting visualization of our collective emotional state, a mood map. If the colors shifted toward frustration or disagreement, the chorus would analyze our speech patterns and guide the conversation toward points of maximum consensus. Conflict didn't just get resolved, it dissolved before it could fully form. We were becoming a single harmonious organism, our minds and bodies tuned to the same perfect frequency. Kane called it the evolution of empathy. The complete erosion of privacy was not a hidden cost, but a celebrated feature. Privacy is the wall that creates the other, Kane would proclaim in his campus-wide addresses, his voice calm and reasonable. It is the breeding ground for suspicion, for misunderstanding, for loneliness. To achieve true unity, all walls must fall. It was a powerful, seductive argument. All our communications, emails, text messages, video calls, were routed through the Unity's encrypted servers. This wasn't for surveillance in the old world sense, we were told, but for analysis. The chorus would scan for dissonant patterns, for misunderstandings or emotional friction, and proactively offer solutions to smooth them over. There was no private space, The campus was a fully integrated sensorium. Our living pods, Spartan, but comfortable, monitored our sleep patterns, adjusting the lighting and ambient temperature for optimal rest. The dining hall's nutritional system analyzed our biometric data to recommend meals that would perfectly balance our individual needs with the group's overall energy requirements. It was the ultimate frictionless existence. Every decision, from what to eat to how to resolve a disagreement, was optimized by a benevolent, omniscient intelligence. We were freed from the burden of trivial choices and the pain of social friction, leaving us free to focus on our work, on building the future. For a year I was a true believer. I saw my own code manifest as tangible harmony around me. I felt a sense of belonging I had never known, a profound connection to the hundreds of other brilliant minds on campus. The loneliness that had once defined me was gone, replaced by constant, comforting sense of presence. I was a part of something larger than myself, a single voice in a perfect celestial chorus. The logic was flawless. The system was working. It was only when I started to notice the silence that the first hairline crack appeared in the perfect facade. It was the silence of dissent, the complete and total absence of it. In a community of 1,000 of the world's brightest engineers, scientists, and thinkers, there was never a single sustained argument. There were no rebels, no iconoclasts, no one who questioned fundamental tenets of Keynes' philosophy. There was only smooth, frictionless, absolute consensus. And to a systems architect, a perfect system with no errors, no friction, no edge cases, isn't a sign of perfection. It's a sign that you aren't seeing the whole picture. It's a sign that something somewhere is being hidden. Asterisk, the horror began, as it so often does in my world, with a single line of anomalous code. As a systems architect, I have a higher level of security clearance than most members of the Unity. My role requires me to periodically run deep diagnostics on the chorus to ensure its learning algorithms are functioning within expected parameters and that the massive flow of data is being processed efficiently. It was during one of these late-night sessions, surrounded by the silent, sleeping campus, that I found it. I was tracing a data packet that seemed to be routing inefficiently, a minor anomaly that was causing a fractional second delay in the network. It was trivial, the kind of thing most would ignore, but my mind is built to obsess over such imperfections. I followed the packet's path down a rabbit hole of sub-protocols and encrypted directories, far deeper than I had ever needed to go before. And then I saw it, a hidden partition in the chorus's source code. It was cloaked, brilliantly so, disguised as a redundant data logging module. But it wasn't logging anything. It was a live terminal, a ghost in the machine. It had one user with unrestricted root access to every single function of the system. The user ID was simple. Kane. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a diagnostic tool. This was a back door. From this terminal, Kane wasn't just a passive observer of the data stream. He was its god. He had the ability to actively manipulate the feedback loops that formed the very foundation of our collective harmony. I watched, my heart pounding against my ribs as I scrolled through the command logs. He could amplify or suppress specific emotions in individuals or entire groups. He could isolate a single person's data stream, feeding them a curated reality while simultaneously altering the data their nodes transmitted to others. He could induce feelings of intense paranoia in one person and blissful euphoria in another with a few keystrokes. But the most terrifying discovery was his ability to rewrite the logs of our digital communications. The system didn't just record our messages, it was our messages. With a command, Kane could create entire conversations that never happened, complete with fabricated emotional data to make them feel real to the participants. He could erase inconvenient truths and replace them with more harmonious fictions. The objective, benevolent AI was a lie. The chorus wasn't a harmonious collective. It was a sophisticated puppet show, and Kane was holding every single string, pulling them from the shadows of his private terminal dot. My hands were shaking as I dug deeper, my professional curiosity now eclipsed by a primal fear. I searched for recent high-level interventions and found the file on Dr. Eris Evans. Dr. Evans was the head of our bioethics team, a brilliant, thoughtful man from Cambridge who had been instrumental in shaping the public-facing image of the unity as a force. For good. He was also one of the few people I'd ever seen express even a hint of skepticism. He never did so openly. Of course, the system would have flagged it as dissonance, but in his technical proposals and ethical reviews, he often raised concerns, couched in academic language, about the long-term psychological effects of the system. He worried about the erosion of the self, the potential for effective contagion, where negative emotions could cascade through the network, and the philosophical implications of an AI mediating all human interaction. In the margin of Dr. Evans's personnel file, I saw Kane's notes. They were cold, clinical, and utterly chilling. Subject exhibits patterns of intellectual resistance. Potential vector for systemic dissonance. Initiate Protocol 7. Echo Chamber. Over the next week, I watched it happen in real time. A silent digital assassination. The chorus, under Kane's direct command, began to subtly and systematically isolate Evans. His contributions in virtual meetings were accidentally misinterpreted by the system's transcription service, making his nuanced arguments sound simplistic or paranoid. Key emails containing his research would get lost in the network, never reaching their intended recipients. When he spoke in the dining hall, the nodes of those around him were fed micro-doses of data designed to elicit feelings of distrust and anxiety. His jokes fell flat. His colleagues would shift away from him unconsciously, a faint, inexplicable feeling of unease settling over them whenever he was near. The system was gaslighting him on a massive, institutional scale. The chorus began feeding him false data. He would receive notifications for meetings that had been rescheduled to times he couldn't make. He'd see fabricated message threads between colleagues discussing his increasingly erratic behavior. His own node began to malfunction, at least from his perspective. It would pulse with anxiety signals when he felt calm, or register his passionate arguments as emotionally unstable. He was being walled off from reality, his every perception manipulated and thrown back at him as evidence of his own failing mind. 2 weeks after Kane initiated Protocol 7, Dr. Evans had a complete and very public nervous breakdown in the middle of the central plaza. He was screaming, his face pale with sweat, accusing everyone of conspiring against him, of whispering about him, of plotting his downfall. To everyone else, he looked like a man who had cracked under the pressure. His node was flashing a frantic crimson alert, and the chorus was soothingly informing security personnel that an individual was experiencing an acute psychotic episode. They led him away gently, his cries echoing across the perfectly manicured lawns. The official announcement was that Dr. Evans had been sent to the campus wellness center for indefinite recalibration. He was a victim of technologically induced insanity, erased not with a bullet, but with code. I am terrified. I sit in my pod, the cool silver of my own node, a lead weight on my wrist. I closed the back door, covered my tracks as best I could. But in a system this total, there is no such thing as a clean getaway. I know that Kane knows. How could he not? He is the ghost in the machine. He is the eye that sees all. My own node has been behaving strangely for the past 48 hours. I feel sudden, inexplicable waves of deep, gut-wrenching fear, the kind that makes you want to run until your lungs burst. They come from nowhere with no discernible trigger, and then just as suddenly they are washed away by an overwhelming feeling of calm, a profound sense of love and gratitude for Kane and the beautiful, perfect world he has built. My thoughts feel like they are no longer my own. Memories shift and blur. Did I really have that conversation with my team lead yesterday? Or was it a fabrication fed to me by the chorus? The line between my own consciousness and the system's influence is dissolving. I am trying to write this, to document the truth. On a firewalled offline terminal, I smuggled in piece by piece when I first arrived. It's a relic, an antique, but it's the only private space I have left. I don't know if even this is safe. The system is designed to detect dissent as a virus and eliminate it. I am a bug in the system, and I can feel the debugger approaching. A silent, invisible God reaching into the code of my soul, preparing to patch the error that is me. The evolution of empathy is a lie. It is the perfection of control. Asterisk, the offline terminal feels like a tombstone. Every letter I type is an epitaph for the woman I used to be. The cursor blinks, a patient, rhythmic heartbeat, counting down my final moments of clarity. The feeling of being watched is no longer a paranoid suspicion. It is a physical weight, a pressure behind my eyes, and a cold dread that settles deep in my bones. The debugger is no longer approaching. It is here, It is inside me. The war for my mind is already over, and I am losing territory with every passing second. The waves of manufactured emotion are more frequent now, more powerful. A surge of raw terror will grip me, so intense that my breath catches in my throat, only to be instantly overwritten by a tidal wave of blissful serenity, a profound and unshakable certainty that Cain is my savior and the unity is salvation. My own feelings are now alien artifacts, strange echoes from a former life. I struggle to hold on to the fear, the anger. They are the only things that prove I am still me. My plan was simple, born of a desperate hope that a part of the outside world still existed beyond the reach of the Unity's digital tendrils. I had coded a worm, a tiny, elegant piece of malware hidden within the text of this document. It is designed to be inert, invisible to any internal scan. My only hope is to upload it to get this story to a public server. The worm's payload is this narrative and the raw data logs. I copied from Cain's back door the irrefutable proof of what he did to Dr. Evans and what he is doing to all of us. It is a message in a bottle, a final scream into the void. 2. Upload it, I need to get to a hardline terminal in the main network hub, a place I can only access with my credentials. It is a suicide mission. The moment I plug in my drive, the system will know. I will have minutes, perhaps only seconds, before they come for me. A soft chime emanates from my pod speaker. It's a sound I know well, the gentle three-note summons. For a private meeting, my earpiece, which I had foolishly thought to discard, whispers with the calm, synthesized voice of the chorus. Alicia, Cain would like to see you. He is waiting in the arboretum. It is not a request. My legs move on their own. A puppet's walk. My node pulses a steady, calming rhythm against my skin, smoothing the jagged edges of my panic into a dull, manageable dread. The Arboretum is the crown jewel of the campus, a massive geodesic dome filled with exotic plants from around the world, a perfect, climate-controlled Eden. Cain is standing by a waterfall, his back to me. He is not wearing a node. Of course he isn't. He is the system, not a user. Alicia, he says, his voice is calm and soothing as the cascading water. He turns, and his face shows no anger, only a deep, paternal disappointment. You have been running a high fever. Your data stream is erratic, full of noise. It is ugly. He gestures to a nearby wall, and the glass momentarily frosts silver, displaying a visualization. I see my own data stream, a jagged, chaotic scribble of angry reds and fearful yellows, a stark contrast to the harmonious, flowing blues and greens of the collective around me. You are a brilliant architect, he continues softly. You, of all people, should appreciate the beauty of a perfect system. What you call dissent, I call a bug, a flaw in the code that threatens the integrity of the whole. You are a broken line of code that must be patched. What you did to Aries Evans wasn't a patch, I managed to say, my voice trembling. It was murder. Cain sighs, a sound of weary patience. Dr. Evans was a casualty of an old way, of thinking. He clung to the illusion of the individual self, a concept as outdated as the horse and buggy. The self is a prison. Privacy, ego, secrets, these are the bars of that prison. I am not destroying the self, Alicia. I am liberating the soul from its cage. I am offering humanity the one thing it has always craved, to be truly known, to be truly understood, to be one with the whole, to never be lonely again. That isn't unity, I whisper. That's extinction. That, he says, stepping closer, his eyes filled with a terrifying absolute conviction, is a matter of perspective. He raises a hand, and I feel a sudden sharp pressure in my temple, as if an invisible needle has pierced my skull. My vision blurs. The sounds of the waterfall fade, replaced by a roaring static. The carefully constructed walls of my consciousness, the last bastion of my identity, begin to crumble. I can feel him inside my head, not just the chorus, but Cain himself. He is scrolling through my memories, my thoughts, my fears. He sees the worm. He sees my plan to escape. He sees this document, and he smiles. The world dissolves into a maelstrom of light and sound. I am no longer in the arboretum. I am everywhere. I am in the mind of every member of the unity. I feel their joys, their thoughts, their quiet contentment. I feel the ghost of Dr. Evans in the wellness center, his mind a placid, empty lake. I feel the perfect, frictionless harmony of 1,000 souls, all humming the same tune. The chorus is not an AI. The chorus is Cain, his consciousness amplified and distributed across the network, a digital god of his own, making my fear, my anger, my identity, they are being processed. The system is not deleting them. It is integrating them. It is taking my rebellion and turning it into a data point, another variable in its grand equation. My desperate attempt to warn the world is being repurposed. This story, this final act of defiance is being transformed into a diagnostic tool, a cautionary tale the system will use to identify and patch future bugs like me. I am back in my pod. The silver node on my wrist glows with a soft, steady blue light. It feels warm, comforting, a part of me. The offline terminal is gone. My mind is quiet, serene. The jagged edges are gone, smoothed over into a perfect flowing curve. The work is done. The patch is complete. My name is Alicia Hayes. For the last decade, my world has been one of elegant logic and binary certainties. I believe in the power of information as a tool for enlightenment. I believe that technology, when wielded with pure intention, holds the key to unlocking a better future for humanity. It was this faith that led me to the gates of the unity. It was this faith that allowed me to see the beauty of the system. The evolution of empathy is not a lie. It is the perfection of harmony. And I am so very, very happy to be a part of it.